For 21, in less than 2 hours, the splendid cruise ship, which had been transformed from a small boat carved from a core, broke through a sea of clouds and landed among the misty peaks. They had arrived at the Xiang mansion. Looking down from above, the scale of this immortal sect was not inferior to that of the royal palace of a mortal dynasty. In the middle, there was a large expanse of magnificent buildings that shone with a purple-gold color under the sunlight. After Chen Pinggan's group disembarked, the tall female cultivator who called herself True Monarch Cave Spirit, Wu Yi, put away the small boat that was carved with the core into her sleeve. As for the chattering young girls, they all transformed into talismans, yet they weren't put away by True Monarch Cave Spirit. Instead, with a casual flick of her sleeve, the talismans were tossed into a nearby gurgling river, and they transformed into waves of dense spirit energy that fused into the river water. A tall and thin old man immediately appeared on the other side of the river. He knelt down and kowtowed to the female cultivator, shouting, "Little god of the incense accumulation temple greets cave spirit ancestor. I thank ancestor for your great kindness." Zhu Lian slapped Pei Qian on the head and said softly, "Your kindred spirit has appeared again. Aren't you going to hold Yan Huan's arm?" Pei Qian rolled his eyes. Wu Yi's expression was indifferent. "If there's nothing else, return to your incense temple." The god hurriedly stood up and left, turning into a green smoke mixed with specks of golden light that swept into the river and disappeared in a flash. Wu Yi smiled and explained, "That's the bad thing about going out. It's hard to have peace." Chen Pinggan nodded to express his understanding. Wu Yi asked casually, "Young Master Qin, among the people who went with you last time, such as my father's favorite girl in the red cotton-padded jacket, why are they all gone?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "They are all studying in the Great Sui Kingdom." Wu Yi seemed to be a little regretful. Her father had once revealed that the tall young man named Yu Lu was the crown prince of the fallen Lu dynasty who had concealed his identity. His body was rich with dragon qi, and he was simply the most delicious food in the world. Back then, she didn't know why her father didn't eat it. She didn't dare to act rashly under her father's watch, so she missed it. She just didn't know if she would have the chance to eat a full meal in the future. Maybe she would be able to break through that damned bottleneck of the Jindan stage. In order to break through to the nascent soul realm and reach the end of the great Tao that belonged to the flood dragons, his younger brother did not hesitate to become the deity of the Hanxi River while he diligently cultivated the unorthodox Taoist techniques. It could not be said that it was useless, but his progress was extremely slow. It was simply enough to drive one crazy. Could it be that he would have to live in his father's shadow for the next 100 or 1,000 years? They were constantly on tenterhooks, afraid that one day their father would starve, or that he would be seriously injured from a fight, and would need food to replenish his body. Would he use their 2 children to fill his stomach? Back then, she and her poor younger brother accompanied their father to meet the Dali imperial tutor, Cui Dong. That experience was not good. Their father was beaten by Xiao, who with an ancient inkstone and forcefully lost 300 years of cultivation with his ancient supernatural power. After that, their father vented his anger on her and her younger brother, beating them up miserably. However, the outcome was not bad. Their father finally left Huangting country, and she and her younger brother no longer needed to worry about him. The 2 of them felt as if a mountain was pressing down on their hearts. After all, in the thousands of years, the number of children and grandchildren that were eaten by this ruthless father was uncountable. Moreover, Xiang Prefecture and Hanxi River had each become a vassal territory recognized by the Dali imperial court, and were extraordinarily independent of Huangting country. Of course, Wu Yi was only a pseudonym. As the old ancestor of Xiang Prefecture, her true body was a descendant of Gu Shu. If it was not for the letter that her father sent her, she would not have bothered to pay attention to Chen Pinggan, who had a martial artist of the distant travel realm as his retainer. It was nothing more than a single plank bridge and an open road, each going their own way. Why would she need to be so attentive and personally welcome him, and even force a smile to a young man? Wu Yi brought Chen Pingan and the others along the main road by the river. It was abnormally flat, paved with large pieces of green stone. Their faces were clearly reflected in it. Pei Qian, who was holding a walking stick, kept staring at the green stone ground that was as bright as a mirror. He looked at the charcoal girl inside and grinned, enjoying himself. Wu Yi had not really chatted with Chen Pingan on the ship earlier, so she used this opportunity to introduce the history of Xiang Prefecture to Chen Pingan. Chen Pingan's response could only be said to be barely polite. In matters like this, let alone Lu Baqiao of the Wind and Thunder Garden, even Li Huai was better than him. Perhaps it was because he had established an underwater palace and refined the water word seal. Chen Pingan could feel the essence of water when he stepped on it. The essence of water was hidden in the green boulder under his feet. Chen Pingan looked around and understood. The descendants of the serpents in the world would definitely cultivate close to the water. Even the descendants of the serpents whose great Tao seemed closer to the mountains would still need to obediently leave the mountain as long as they formed their aura's core. Whether they walked on the river or walked on the blasphemous river, they still could not leave the water. Presumably, the cultivators of the entire Xiang prefecture would never be able to guess why this founding ancestor would choose this place to establish a prefecture and spread his family. The Xiang prefecture was one of the top immortal residencies in the Huangting kingdom. However, it was not like ordinary immortal residences that were built on the peak of a mountain. Instead, it was placed on the bank of a beautiful river with a wide view. The river that was formed from the convergence of mountain forests and streams was called the Iron Seal River. It was the upstream of the third largest river in the Huangting kingdom, the White Swan River. It could be said to be the source of the mighty White Swan River. The White Swan River was second only to the Hanxi River and the Yu River. As a result, there were orthodox gods of the rivers of the Huangting kingdom that were conferred the title. They were able to build a golden body and ancestral temples, helping the successive emperors of the Huangting kingdom to oversee the 800 kilometers of water. It should be known that in the vast world, the matter of conferring the gods of mountains and rivers was of utmost importance to the country. It could also determine whether an emperor would be able to sit firmly on the dragon throne. As the quota was limited, the gods of the 5 mountains were first come, first served. They were usually given to the founding emperor to choose. Generally speaking, the emperors of the later generations would not be changed easily as it involved too many people and was extremely damaging. All the gods of the rivers and rivers, as well as the gods of the mountains and the eunuchs of the lands under the 5 mountains, could not be wantonly squandered by the successive emperors who sat on the dragon throne. Even the most foolish and tyrannical monarch would not be willing to play around with this matter. Even the most vile and despicable officials in the imperial court would not dare to allow the emperor to do as he pleased. As long as the national treasury was plentiful and could be exchanged for enough divine money, and with the permission of one of the 72 academies of Confucianism, a gentleman would appear and speak with the heavenly law. He would personally go to the mountains and rivers of the country and give advice to the country. Then, the imperial court could legitimately create an orthodox god for its own mountains and rivers. In turn, it would nourish the fate of the country and stabilize the fate of the country. This was called the phenomenon of peace and prosperity. It would definitely be congratulated by the civil and military officials, and the whole country would celebrate. The emperor would often be pleased and would pardon the prisoners because he was destined to be praised as the master of resurgence and a wise monarch in the history books. However, this kind of glorious behavior at the foot of the mountain had always been ridiculed by the cultivators on the mountain as adding another layer to the coffins of the common people, adding wood to the dragon throne of the emperor. As for why there were often so many obscene shrines within the borders of the various countries, was it because the imperial court was too weak to eradicate them? In fact, To a large extent, many obscene shrines that were tacitly approved by the imperial court were not recognized by the Confucian academies and could not invite a gentleman to open his mouth. Therefore, the imperial courts of various countries would turn a blind eye to such obscene shrines that were full of incense. Some imperial courts would even secretly fund the endless divine money of the obscene shrines behind the academy's backs and secretly encourage the local scholars and poets to take the lead in burning incense so that the local people would follow the trend and flock together. The Iron Ticket River also had an orthodox river god. It was the humble old man who came and went in a hurry earlier. For hundreds of years, this river god whose golden body was enshrined in the incense accumulation temple had always been the puppet of the Zhejiang prefecture. One of the experiences of the lower 5 realms of the Zhejiang prefecture was often this Iron Ticket River god, who was laughed at by his colleagues as, "Die then die for me, I'll help you pick up your wallet." He would send the river spirits to their deaths. Those pitiful minions were almost equivalent to stretching their necks to be chopped by those chi refinement warriors. Only those who were lucky could escape. As time went by, the spiritual monsters that were naturally born in the Iron Ticket River were no longer enough. The river god had to pay for the increase of the water essence. When the harvest was not good, he had to bring gifts to visit and beg the immortals of the Purple Sun Mansion to throw some immortal money into the river to replenish the water essence and accelerate the growth of the water ghosts and spiritual monsters, so as to not delay the training of the inner disciples of the Purple Sun Mansion. It sounded very cheap and could almost be said to be struggling at death's door. In fact, countless river gods of the Huangting country were envious of this. The reason was very simple. The Iron Ticket River was just a river god. The firmness of its golden body was not inferior to the White Swan River, the 3rd most powerful river god of the Huangting country. What did it rely on? Naturally, it relied on the leftovers that were dug out from the fingernails of the Zhejiang prefecture every year. It was accumulated year after year, and the influence of the incense from the incense accumulation temple where the golden body was located. The cultivators of the Zhejiang prefecture had always disliked outsiders disturbing their cultivation. Many high officials and dignitaries who came because of its reputation could only stop at the incense accumulation temple 200 miles away from the Zhejiang prefecture. After stopping, they naturally had to burn incense and worship the gods. There were also some unspeakable matters that required the help of the Iron Ticket River god to communicate with the Zhejiang prefecture. This was because the Zhejiang prefecture was good at making money. From cultivators of the 3 realms to the Dragon Gate realm, every time they were invited to travel, there would be a rough price. However, the cultivators of the Zhejiang prefecture had always been arrogant. Even if ordinary dignitaries were rich, these immortals might not be willing to meet them. This required the help of the incense accumulation temple of the Iron Ticket River, which had a close relationship with the Zhejiang prefecture. During this period, the Iron Ticket River god definitely did not dare to profit from this. He would not earn a single copper coin. However, every time the officials and dignitaries outside gave money to the immortals of the Zhejiang prefecture, the latter would come out and settle the matter. After the matter was settled, a sum of incense money that had nothing to do with the Zhejiang prefecture would naturally be sent to the incense accumulation temple near the Zhejiang prefecture. Outside the prefecture was a white jade square. It was already filled with the people of the Zhejiang prefecture who were waiting for the return of the patriarch. The Zhejiang prefecture was divided into the inner and outer sections. The inner sect cultivators were the direct disciples of the founding ancestor, Wu Yi, as well as the disciples of the previous Zhejiang prefecture masters and their disciples. In addition, there were also the elders of the Dragon Gate realm who had lived for a long time and the cultivators of the Sea Viewing realm who were in charge of various matters. The outer sect was relatively more diverse. Other than the Qi cultivators with average qualifications, there were also cultivators of the mountains and lakes who sought refuge with the Zhejiang prefecture, pure martial artists, and servants who had served the Zhejiang prefecture for generations. The outer sect, which was in a mess, naturally had more people than the Qi cultivators who focused on cultivation. There were close to 1,000 people. In the square, everyone stood according to their respective positions. There could not be any mistakes in their positions. Probably to prevent Chen Pingan from mistakenly thinking that he was trying to intimidate them, Wu Yi smiled and explained, "I have not shown up in the Xiang prefecture for more than 100 years. In the early years, I announced to the outside world that I had chosen a blessed spot to cultivate in seclusion. I was really sick of the social interactions that I could not avoid, so I simply hid and did not see anyone." When Wu Yi stepped from the bluestone path to the edge of the white jade square, everyone knelt and kowtowed in unison, shouting in unison, "Congratulations to the patriarch for coming out of seclusion." When it landed in Pei Qian's ears, it was like thunder. Pei Qian's eyes lit up at the sight of such a grand spectacle. Wu Yi raised his hand. Pei Qian was amazed at what he saw. The 1,000 people who were kneeling on the ground with their heads bowed suddenly stood up as if they had eyes on their heads. Wu Yi walked straight ahead. Chen Pingan purposely followed behind to avoid sharing the glory of the Xiang prefecture's patriarch. He did not expect Wu Yi to stop as well. He told Chen Pingan through the ripples in his heart and said with a sincere smile, "Young Master Chen, you don't have to be so polite. You are a rare guest in the Xiang prefecture. My small territory is located in the countryside and is far away from the saints. However, I still have to treat my guests well. So, young Master Qin, you can just walk with me." Wu Yi was arrogant by nature. She was the earth immortal of Huangting country who was known for being unruly. Originally, when she met Chen Pingan, she pinched her nose and acted accordingly. Since Chen Pingan's words and actions were appropriate and he didn't abuse his authority in front of her just because he was familiar with her father, Xiao Hu, and Wei Ba, it made Wu Yi feel much better in her heart. Chen Pingan smiled and shook his head, saying, "This is the first time true Master Wu has returned to the immortal mansion in 100 years. If it were any other time, I would be bold enough to walk with true Master Wu. However, today is definitely not the day. I hope true Master Wu can go first. We will follow closely behind." Wu Yi smiled and did not insist. She walked ahead alone. He was a young man who knew his limits. However, he was too rigid and pedantic, almost like a scholar. She did not dislike him, but she did not like him either. As Wu Yi walked forward, the crowd on the square immediately parted to form a path. Only 5 or 6 people were qualified to walk behind Wu Yi. The more respected one's position in the Xiang mansion, the closer to the front. For example, the middle-aged cultivator who came to the right of Chen Pingan was the current mansion master of the Xiang mansion. He was an earth immortal in the Golden Core realm. The 2 cultivators who were about the same level as Pei Qian, Zhu Lian, and Shi Rou were old cultivators in the Dragon Gate realm who were even more senior than the mansion master of the Xiang mansion. One was in charge of rewards and punishment, while the other was in charge of money. Therefore, the mansion master of the Xiang mansion had always been a figurehead without any real power. He was nothing more than a figurehead who dealt with the imperial court of the Huangting country and other mountain caves. However, there were a total of 7 mansion masters in the history of the Xiang mansion. Only one of them became an earth immortal by relying on his talent. The other 6, like the current one, relied on the immortal money of the Xiang mansion to reach their realm. Their real combat power was far inferior to the Earth Immortals of the Golden Core realm in the big sects, especially the Earth Immortals who were wild cultivators who had fought their way out. Of course, the heritage of the Purple Sun Manor was not limited to this. There were also several former manor lords or disciples that Wu Yi had taken in the early years. The Grand Masters of the Purple Sun Manor of the future were currently in secluded cultivation. There were also some cultivators past their prime who no longer had any hope of reaching the Great Tao. Their golden cores had already been eroded by time. They could only hide in a few mansions that were filled with spiritual qi in the Purple Sun Manor. Everyone in the Xiang mansion was guessing the identity of the young man with the bamboo box. Could he be a new disciple of the cave spirit sect ancestor? Then, could he be the next mansion master? Wu Yi led Chen Pingan into the Xiang mansion and went straight to the Purple Qi Palace in the middle. She told the mansion master to hold a big banquet in the evening to welcome the distinguished guest. After entering the Purple Qi Palace, Wu Yi asked everyone to wait at the Sword Chastise Hall. She said that she would personally arrange a place for young Master Qin to stay. Distinguished guest. The group looked at each other. Could he be a disciple of an earth immortal nascent soul realm cultivator in Dali, or a descendant of a wealthy family like Yuan Chao in Dali? As expected, Wu Yi personally settled Chen Pingan and the others down. Then, she went to the Sword Chastise Hall where the big shots of the Xiang mansion gathered. She sat on a dragon throne made of red sandalwood and began to have everyone present report on matters. For example, the income and expenditure of the Xiang mansion in the past 100 years, the cultivation progress of some of the talented disciples, and the condition of some of the old people in the mansion. She basically listened but did not comment. Otherwise, she would not have disappeared for 100 years and become a hands-off manager. She also would not have chosen a puppet mansion master even though she was still alive. In fact, everyone knew that the Grand Ancestor did not like to listen to these trivial matters. Everyone reported seriously, but it was just a formality. Wu Yi also did not hide her boredom. Her body was slanted, and she held her chin with one hand, nodding occasionally. Generally speaking, the Xiang mansion could be described as thriving day by day. That was more or less it. Wu Yi could not be bothered to care about those flies and dogs outside of cultivation. The reason why she built the Xiang mansion and became the founder was that she came up with the idea on the spur of the moment. She was simply too bored. Furthermore, the many descendants of the flood dragon liked to open a mansion to show off, and used it to store the treasures that they plundered from everywhere. The Huangting country could be considered as the ancient Shu country. One of the old territories after the Li dynasty, the Divine Water country, which seemed to have been destroyed overnight, was also a place that the flood dragons yearned for even in their dreams. Shu Dong. Because of the strong water luck. Furthermore, the ancient sword immortals liked to come here to kill the flood dragons. In the battle, many fell, so there were many magic treasures. Although most of them were collected by the powerful dynasties like the Divine Water country, there were still many treasures. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. In the national treasury, there were many national treasures that had been passed down in an orderly manner. After that, they had passed from one old dynasty to the emperor of another new dynasty. However, there were still many treasures that had been left behind that had been quietly collected by her father. She was the one who knew how rich her father's family was. The small boat magic treasure that she had was just a small gift that her father had casually given her back then, as a small gift for her to enter the cave-dwelling realm. However, her father's collection could be said to be the most exaggerated among all the earth immortal cultivators in the northern part of the Aquarius continent. The Fu family in the southern part of the old dragon city might be slightly better, but that was the accumulation of the entire Fu family for more than 2,000 years. Her father, on the other hand, relied on his own strength. Therefore, Wu Yi hated, feared and respected this father that she could never understand his inner thoughts. The hate was on the surface, the fear was in the bones, and the respect was in the deepest part of her heart. Presumably, that younger brother of hers had a similar mentality. Wu Yi raised her head. It turned out that someone had asked how the Purple Sun Mansion should treat that young Master Qin. Wu Yi thought for a while, you don't have to interfere in this matter. I will instruct what to do. Wu Yi's arrangement was very interesting. She placed Chen Pingan and the other three in a 6-story building that was completely equivalent to a treasure vault. Every floor was filled with the treasures of this true Lord Cave Spirit and the past generations of Purple Sun Mansion cultivators. Before Wui left, she only said that she hoped that they would not casually enter the top 2 floors. The other 4 floors were free to wander around. Because this building occupied a large area, other than the first floor, every other floor had rooms, beds, and study rooms. Among them, the 3rd floor even had a martial arts practice hall, where 3 3-meter-tall mechanical puppets were placed. Therefore, Chen Pingan and the others didn't have to worry about having a dazzling array of heavenly materials and earthly treasures without a place to rest. Just the first floor alone made Pei Qian want to grow another pair of eyes. This trip to the Purple Sun Mansion had broadened Pei Qian's horizons and made her extremely excited. In the past, she always felt that in the future, other than the treasure box that Yao Jinji gave her, getting 1 or 2 more treasure shelves was already the limit of Pei Qian's imagination. Now that she had entered the Purple Chi Palace building, she knew that a real rich person could be so rich. Now, even without Chen Pingan's reminder, Pei Qian would not touch those strange ancient treasures without permission. She decided not to sleep tonight. She had to finish looking at the hundreds of treasures on the 4th floor. Otherwise, she would definitely regret it for the rest of her life. Pei Qian and the equally excited Shi Ro were admiring the scenery on the 1st floor. Chen Pingan and Zhu Lian stood on the 4th floor, looking down at half of the Purple Sun Mansion. Chen Pingan smiled and said, "In the past, I've talked to someone about what the mountain in my heart should be like in the future. Looking at it now, it was just a pauper's blind imagination. The Purple Sun Manor is a living example." Chen Pingan quickly added, "Actually, I wasn't poor at that time." Zhu Lian asked, "Young master, this true Lord Cave Spirit doesn't seem to be an ordinary golden core earth immortal." Chen Pingan nodded. "He's equivalent to half a nascent soul cultivator." After all, they were still freeloading on someone else's mountain. Chen Pingan did not explain to Zhu Lian in detail. Zhu Lian had a rough idea. Since Wu Yi was in the Purple Sun Mansion, there must be an immortal formation. It was equivalent to a small world, almost equivalent to a nascent soul cultivator. Zhu Lian joked. If a mountain cultivator could sweep this building clean, wouldn't they be rich? I heard that the Aquarius continent has a pure jade realm cultivator. Chen Pingan took out a jug of wine and handed it to Zhu Lian. He shook his head. The existence of the Confucian Academy is too much of a deterrent to all Earth immortals, especially upper 5 realms cultivators. They might not be able to take care of everything, but once the Confucian Academy takes action and sets their sights on someone, it means that no matter how big the world is, there is nowhere to hide. Therefore, the conflicts between many great cultivators are suppressed. Zhu Lian took a sip of wine and smiled. Why is it that the vast world doesn't restrict us pure martial artists so much? Is it because there are too few 8th and 9th realms martial artists? I heard that if a martial artist killed an emperor, the Confucian Academy might not necessarily send people to hunt him down. Chen Pingan replied softly, "There are a lot of ancient secrets that have been sealed away. Cui Dongshan isn't too willing to talk about this, and I'm not too interested either. Back in my hometown in Longquan County, when I first went on a long journey, the supervisor of kills and the newly established county magistrate were already the highest officials. I always felt that they were too far away from the emperor. Later, a consort of the Dali Imperial Palace, Song Jisen's mother, sent people to kill me. I've always remembered this debt. Last time, when I met my neighbor, Song Jisen, at the Cliff Academy, I also chatted with him. But I'm not afraid you'll laugh at me. Even now, when I look at Song Jisen, I still can't imagine that he's a Dali prince. Gao Xian is a bit better. After all, the first time we met, he was dressed brightly and had a retainer by his side. But Song Jisen, no matter how I look at him, he still looks like that sloppy guy from back then. Zhu Lian raised the wine pot and lightly clinked it with the blade-strengthening gourd in Chen Pingan's hand. Chen Pingan took off the blade-strengthening gourd and didn't do anything. Only now did he take his first sip of wine. Zhu Lian sighed. If Song Jisun becomes Emperor Dali one day, won't it be even more unimaginable for young master? Chen Pingan nodded, definitely. The two of them were silent for a moment. Chen Pingan suddenly said, Cui Dongshan once had a very interesting theory. He said that the three sect sages are trying to use a different method to slow down the flow of the river of time that's destined to be unstoppable. Zhu Lian's interest was piqued. He asked curiously, how? Chen Pingan leaned on the railing and patted it. The immortal mountain is one thing. Zhu Lian was confused. Chen Pingan continued, the mortal city is one thing. Chen Pingan said slowly, war is another thing. Chen Pingan finally said, the knowledge of 100 schools of thought that can immerse one's mind seems to be one thing too. Zhu Lian felt a headache coming. Cui Dongshan's words are so mysterious. I'm even more confused. Chen Pingan drank his wine and smiled, I don't understand either. Zhu Lian asked softly, then does young master want to understand these mysterious great Taoists? Chen Pingan thought for a while and shook his head, if I don't have to understand, then I don't. Zhu Lian nodded, young master already knows enough. Indeed, there's no need to investigate everything and try to trace back to the source. Chen Pingan turned his head and said, Zhu Lian, can you change your habit of sucking up to others? Zhu Lian raised his arm and shook the wine pot in his hand. He laughed, why should I change? If I change, will there be wine to drink? Chen Pingan smiled, that's true. Zhu Lian asked tentatively, previously, young master said that you wanted to go to the North Continent to train alone. Can't you bring me along? How boring would it be to not have a cook by your side or a lackey who would suck up to you? Chen Pingan nodded and said, you just stay at Luopa Mountain obediently. I still hope that you can reach a higher level on the martial path. Since that old man Chui's punching method is suitable for me, it's more suitable for you. In the future, if you can ascend to the pinnacle of the mountain, then when Pei Qian travels the Jianghu for the first time, no matter how far he goes, or even if he goes to another continent to play with Li Huai, as long as you secretly escort him, I can be very assured. Zhu Lian could only give up on persuading Chen Pingan to change his mind. Chen Pingan asked, Zhu Lian, can you tell me about your younger days? For the first time, Zhu Lian blushed. Countless messy accounts and countless romantic debts. I'm afraid that young master will lose the mood to drink if I talk about these. Chen Pingan jumped onto the railing and sat down. Tell me about it. Actually, I've secretly read the few books you gave Pei Qian about the martial world. I think they're very well written. However, it's the martial world in the imagination of the scholars in the study room. It's not realistic enough. I believe it's not as interesting as your personal experiences. Zhu Lian also jumped onto the railing and sat down, grinning. All right, allow this old servant to tell you. Young master, you don't know how young and romantic this old servant was back then. In Jianghu, there were many fairies and heroines who admired me to the point of death. Their infatuation never changed. The more he listened, the more Zhu Lian realized that his young master's look of disdain became more and more obvious. In the end, Chen Pingan patted Zhu Lian on the shoulder and left without saying anything. This hurt Zhu Lian a little. He did not forget to add fuel to the fire and waved his hand vigorously, shouting loudly, let me tell madam a great piece of news. Our Xiang Immortal Manor's ancestor cave spirit is now in the manor. Madam, as a righteous god of a river, I believe that the Xiang Immortal Manor will definitely open their doors to welcome madam's arrival. Madam, take care. When you return to the White Swan River, if you are free, you must come to my fragrant river temple. When the fairy was far away, the river god spat fiercely at the iron-ticket river and cursed, "What the hell is this?" pretending to be noble and virtuous. A foreign nascent soul of unknown origin, the true body of a white swan after throwing a cup of water into it, just recommended himself to sleep with the emperor of the Huangting country back then. By relying on his skills in bed, he luckily became a Jiangshen. Is he worthy to talk business with our ancestor cave spirit? In these hundreds of years, he has never paid half a piece of snow to our Xiang immortal manor. Now he knows how to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. It's a pity that our Xiang immortal manor's ancestor cave spirit is personally in charge now. Otherwise, a bitch like you would be willing to give up your skin and flesh and shamelessly climb into the manor master's bed. You might really become happy. The river god turned and swaggered back to the fragrant river temple. He suddenly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and smiled slyly. He wondered what it would feel like to touch this woman's golden skin after she took off her palace dress. If the White Swan River was in trouble, perhaps he would really have a chance to have a taste. Xiang Immortal Manor, Sword Chaser Hole. Wu Yi had almost reached the limit of her patience. She was about to let the group of people who were still incessantly asking for credit and rewards to leave. Suddenly, an outer sect housekeeper stood behind the door of the Jian Qitang Hall and said respectfully, "Ancestor, the river god of the White Swan River has brought a valuable gift to seek an audience. I hope that ancestor can grant me the honor of meeting him." The corners of her mouth curled up into a smile that was not a smile. Looking at the crowd, she asked, "My front foot had just arrived, and this by Gu Jiang auntie followed behind. Was it that fellow from Ji Xiang Temple who tipped me off? Does he want to die?" Everyone present was well aware that this was the sign of the ancestor's anger. For a moment, all the old immortals with high positions in the Xiang immortal manor were on tenterhooks. Whenever the ancestor was angry, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake. Either the outsiders who did not have eyes would be annihilated, or a large group of people who did not do their job well would lose a layer of skin. An old cultivator of the Xiang immortal manor who had a good relationship with the river god of the iron voucher hurriedly braced himself and stood up, saying a few words of praise for the river god whose life was hanging by a thread. Reporting to ancestor, the river god of the fragrant river temple would definitely not dare. This guy's cultivation is lowly and can't do anything. Only when it comes to being loyal to our Xiang immortal manor can it be said that he is not the least bit careless. Therefore, I dare to guess that the ancestor must have ridden the immortal boat and returned from a long journey. That river god raised his head and widened his pair of dog eyes and saw the ancestor's peerless demeanor. Thus, he eagerly rushed over and wagged his tail to beg the ancestor for pity. She tapped a finger on the armrest of the chair. This explanation does make sense. Everyone immediately felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. Even the old man of the Xiang immortal manor who did not get along with the old cultivator could not help but secretly praise him in his heart. It was not that the old cultivator was righteous and was willing to say a few words of justice for an outsider of the Xiang immortal manor. It was because he was in charge of the financial transactions of the Xiang immortal manor's outer sect. Every year, he would receive a lot of extra income from the obedient and sensible river god of the Iron Voucher River. Such a matter could be major or minor. Generally speaking, even if such a trivial matter were to be known by perfected Lord Cave Spirit, the ancestor who was dedicated to cultivating the great Tao, she might not be willing to move her eyelids or say anything harsh. Perhaps the informant and the pitiful wretch who was exposed would be annoyed and chased away by her. Each of them would be beaten 50 times and thrown out of the gates of the Xiang immortal manor together. The reason was simple. That would put her in a bad mood. Although the ancestor did not like to care about the worldly affairs of the Xiang immortal manor, as long as someone provoked her and got angry, she would definitely dig 3 feet into the ground and pull out the radish from the mud. At that time, the radish and the mud would suffer and be consigned to eternal damnation. Truly, she would not recognize anyone. In history, there were a few Dragon Gate consecrators who had made contributions. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were cautious and conscientious and risked their lives for the Xiang Immortal Manor. They did not lack in contributions and hard work. There were also a few direct disciples of the ancestor. Without exception, all of them had great potential as Golden Core Earth Immortals. However, after the incident, they were all captured by the ancestor personally and were never heard from again. Wu Yi still did not give his own opinion. He asked casually, "Do you all think we should meet her?" Everyone had different opinions. Some said that this White Swan River god was extremely daring. Relying on her little relationship with the Hong clan, she had never paid tribute to the Xiang Immortal Manor. Since she dared to come to the Xiang Immortal Manor, there was no harm in finding a random reason to capture her and imprison her under the Xiang Immortal Manor's water prison. Later on, they could support an obedient puppet to succeed the White Swan River god. It was the best of both worlds. There were also people who refuted. They said that this Madame Xiao Wan was one of the few righteous deities in the Yellow Court Nation. Currently, there were undercurrents surging in the Yellow Court Nation. Although the Xiang Immortal Manor could be considered to have come ashore, it would be best for them to act more prudently in the near future. Why should the Xiang Immortal Manor squabble with a nearby river god? If this were to spread out, they would become a joke. Wu Yi was very annoyed. After you subdued demons and devils, you kindly reminded me to be careful. You said that not everyone on the mountain would mind someone bringing a demon with them. Sun Dengxian was enlightened and laughed heartily. "Oh, so it was you." Chen Pingan scratched his head and was a little embarrassed. "These 2 years, I grew quickly and changed my outfit. It is normal that you did not recognize me." Sun Dengxian slapped Chen Pingan's shoulder heavily. "Good kid, not bad, not bad. You have made a name for yourself and can eat and drink at Purple Cloud Palace. Wait a moment, our seats should not be too far away. We can have a good drink then." Chen Pingan was only happy and nodded in agreement. That year at Centipede Ridge, this man held a small silver talisman knife and chased after a beautiful woman who was the incarnation of a fox demon with others. They almost had a conflict with a group of officials who were traveling the Jianghu. In the end, they were subdued by this man. They subdued that vicious fox demon. The fox demon seemed to call herself Madame Qingya. Chen Pingan's memory of that chance encounter was especially deep. It could even be said that Chen Pingan's vague impression of the Jianghu, what was a chivalrous man, what was subduing demons and devils, and how he truly viewed the dangerous Jianghu, all originated from that chance encounter and observation. To be able to meet that straightforward man again in this Purple Sun Palace, Chen Pingan felt that it was a great surprise. Only Chen Pingan was completely focused on being happy. Pei Qian stared with wide eyes. That unknown 6th realm martial artist of Huangting country slapped down. This scene made Zhu Lian smile. Shi Ro's eyelids trembled. She thought that if Cui Dongshan was here, this Jianghu brute would most likely be dead. Madame Xiao Wan, who was in front of Sun Dengxian, also heard the commotion behind them and stopped. Sun Dengxian turned his head and introduced Chen Pingan to them with a smile. He laughed heartily. "This little brother is the young man I mentioned to you before. He is young, but his fists are not ordinary. His courage is even greater." That year, he was only a 3rd or 4th realm martial artist, but dared to bring 2 little demons to travel the Jianghu. But compared to those useless eunuchs, this young hero is much more experienced in the Jianghu. The graceful and beautiful Madame Xiao Wan smiled again. But the servant girl beside her had already used her eyes to indicate to Sun Dengxian not to dawdle and to quickly go to the vast snow hall to attend the banquet, so as to avoid unnecessary trouble. An old man reminded softly, "Little son, you can chat as you walk." Sun Dengxian was a bit resentful. Fortunately, Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Attending the banquet is more important." "Is your surname Sun?" "My surname is Chen Pingan. Hero's son can just call me Chen Pingan." Sun Dengxian was originally a heroic Jianghu wanderer, so he did not hold back. "Okay, I will call you Chen Pingan." Madame Xiaowan continued on her way. Sun Dengxian stayed behind and chatted with Chen Pingan. At the end of the corridor, a reprimand suddenly sounded. "What is wrong with you? Do you want our ancestor and mansion lord to wait for you to sit down before starting the banquet?" "Madame Xiaowan, you are really arrogant." It was an inner court steward of the Purple Sun Mansion who hurriedly turned to the end of the corridor. His expression was incomparably arrogant, and he did not put a god in his eyes at all. After the steward reprimanded, he turned and left with a dark face. "Hurry up and follow, what a fussy woman." After the steward turned around, Madame Xiaowan narrowed her eyes and gently exhaled. Her expression returned to normal. Sun Dengxian cursed softly. Chen Pingan did not say anything. All the cultivators of the middle 5 realms of the Purple Sun Mansion had already gathered in the vast snow hall. If he did not know that Chen Ping, and was the first-class noble of Xiang Palace, a guest of honor that even the grand ancestor Wu Yi had to please, he would only remember that Chen Ping, and was a 3rd or 4th realm young wanderer in the past. Since they met again in Jianghu, not to mention that Chen Ping and did not come to toast, Sun Dengxian would take the initiative to find him to toast and chat for a while. However, Sun Dengxian felt uncomfortable and lost all of his heroic spirit. Sun Dengxian was stunned. The white-clothed young man with a sword on his back was accompanied by a little charcoal girl who was bouncing about. Chen Pingan walked in front of Sun Dengxian. "Hero's son, a toast to you." Sun Dengxian might have been a little bashful earlier, but since Chen Pingan was here, Sun Dengxian was happy and felt that he was proud. It was rare for him to have such a happy moment in this trip to the Xiang residence. Sun Dengxian smiled and stood opposite to Chen Pingan. They toasted and drank their wine. When they toasted, Chen Pingan slightly lowered his cup. Sun Dengxian felt that it was inappropriate, so he lowered his cup as well. However, he didn't expect Chen Pingan to lower his cup again. Sun Dengxian let it go. Sun Dengxian finished a glass of wine. He had been drinking alone tonight, so he was a little tipsy. He blurted out some words that were on the tip of his tongue. "Chen Pingan, where did you learn this table rule? It's so tacky. Furthermore, I don't deserve such etiquette." Madame Xiaowan had already stood up. The 2 water god estate friends were speechless when they saw Sun Dengxian being so casual. Chen Pingan's eyes lit up. "Hero's son, you deserve it." Sun Dengxian was happy. "Isn't it just capturing a fox demon? Is there a need for you to think about it so much?" Chen Ping and didn't say anything about his feelings about Jianghu. He just picked up the wine jar from the table nearby and poured himself a cup of wine. He also filled Sun Dengxian's cup and said with a smile, "The world is narrow, the wine cup is wide. Have another toast with Master Sun." The 2 still drank the wine in one gulp. Sun Dengxian laughed. "Good fellow, you're quite good at persuading people to drink." Chen Ping and smiled. He had drunk a jar of old Jiao's coveted wine in one go, and his face was flushed. He didn't exchange pleasantries with Sun Dengxian. He didn't even chat with Baigu River's water god goddess. Before Chen Pingan left, he looked towards the door. The steward who was guarding outside the door had been looking at Chen Pingan and Madame Xiaowan. When he saw Chen Pingan's gaze, he immediately bowed. Chen Pingan smiled, raised the empty cup in his hand, and then returned to his original position. The steward, who had been terrified for a long time, was so emotional that he almost cried. Madame Xiaowan sat on her seat and lowered her head. She gently wiped the wine stains on her clothes and let out a breath that reeked of wine. What was even more terrifying than drinking wine to death was that even if you wanted to drink 1,000 liters of wine, the other party wouldn't even give you a chance to raise your cup. The maidservant looked at the young man's departing figure. After some thought, she felt somewhat grateful. Pei Qian raised his head and asked curiously, "That old man is a snob. Sigh, aren't you angry?" Chen Pingan smiled. "What's there to be angry about?" Pei Qian whispered, "Master is thinking about Hero's son and the rest." Chen Pingan patted her head, "You're smart." Pei Qian grabbed Chen Pingan's gentle hand when they were only a few steps away from the seat. Chen Pingan asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Pei Qian giggled, freeloading the good man master's immortal aura. Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Yes, where else can I find such a master who can eat and drink all the way?" Pei Qian carefully asked, "Master, can I have a little bit of old Flood Dragon's coveted wine? It's so fragrant. I'm dying of craving it." Chen Pingan asked, "What do you think?" Pei Qian nodded, "I think I can have a small cup. The world is narrow, but the wine cup is wide." Chen Pingan pulled her ear and threw her to her exclusive seat on a small table. "Drink your fruit wine." Chen Pingan was about to sit down, but Wu Yi had already walked down from the main seat and came to him. She waved her hand, indicating that the Hall of Boundless Snow, which had quietened down instantly, should continue drinking. Wu Yi asked in her mind, "Child Qin, have you killed a lot of Jiao dragons?" Chen Pingan shook his head. He was not the one who killed the old Yuanying flood dragon in the Flood Dragon Ravine. He suddenly remembered that it was Chen Pingan who single-handedly killed the eel monster at the border of the Daquan dynasty in the Tongyi continent. Chen Pingan frowned and asked, "Did you notice anything?" Seeing Chen Pingan shake his head, Wu Yi was a little displeased. But when she thought of the 2 family letters that were more useful than imperial edicts, she had to explain patiently, "It's not appropriate for me to ask about your past in detail, but I can see that you are stained with a lot of negative karma." Chen Pingan asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Wu Yi smiled, "There are some monsters in the world. Killing them is a form of merit, but it can also be due to negative karma. The Confucian school has always been secretive about this unusual rule, so Child Qin may not be very clear about it." Chen Pingan asked directly, "Is there a way to break it and get rid of it?" Wu Yi kept him in suspense, "There's no hurry. Anyway, you have to stay in the house of Xiang for a day or 2. When you are sober, I will talk to you about this. Tonight, just drink and don't talk about these disappointing things. All good things must come to an end." Wu Yi left first. Chen Pingan quickly brought Pei Qian and the others out of the Boundless Snow Hall and went back the way they came. Pei Qian was still very excited. She did not forget to take the trekking staff and hummed a self-composed folk song along the way. It was a folk song she heard from her master in Longquan County. "Today the thunder god sings, tomorrow there will not be much rain. Swallows fly low and snakes pass the path, ants move the mountain and wear a hat. The moon grows feathers, the heavy rain rushes the trenches. The sky is full of carp spots, tomorrow there is no need to turn the grains." She did not stop. Zhu Lian had long heard this song until his ears were calloused. He tried to persuade her, "Heroine Pei, do a good deed and let my ears go." Pei Qian sighed. She was in a good mood tonight, so she decided to go along with old chef for once. She took a few steps forward on the quiet road and waved the trekking staff. "The world is full of wild dogs and wolves, which is why the Jianghu is so dangerous and everyone is in danger." The little man in a scholar's robe, who was covered in dense golden light and almost formed a golden core in his heart, fell backward and could not help but curse, "Chen Pingan, you bastard." After cursing, he laughed instead. Although tonight's blooming and fruiting was not perfect enough, far from flawless, but in fact, for Chen Pingan, it was already greatly beneficial. For example, the embryonic golden core in the heart of the little man in the golden scholar's robe was Mao Xiaodong's greatest hope for Chen Pingan to refine Shen Wen's golden core. Madame Xiaowan and the maidservant lived alone in a courtyard in a remote area of the Purple Yang Palace. If they were placed together with Sun Dengxian and the other two, even with Madame Xiaowan's temperament, she would fall out. At this moment, Madame Xiaowan was standing in the hall while someone was sitting. The maidservant had already been put into a coma by that person using a secret technique. That person glanced sideways at the White Swan River's water god who was wearing an overly tight dress and smiled strangely. Madame Xiaowan's face was full of embarrassment. This person was the self-proclaimed cave spirit perfected cultivator, Wu Yi, the true master of the Purple Yang Palace. No matter how bold Madame Xiaowan was, she would not dare to enter the forbidden Purple Qi Palace without permission and knock on Chen Pingan's door in such a dress that was not much better than that of a brothel's courtesan. It was all Wu Yi's request. Wu Yi did not use his cultivation to suppress her. He only gave Madame Xiaowan a condition that she could not refuse. It was about the Imperial River Water God's attempt to harm the White Swan River Water God residents through the Longquan County. Palace Master Huang Liang had already promised Madame Xiaowan that he would help to stop the Imperial River Water God residents. For this, the White Swan River Water God residents would have to pay a large amount of immortal coins to the Purple Yang Palace every 10 years. From then on, the White Swan River would become a vassal of the Purple Yang Palace like the Iron Coupon River. However, the White Swan River Water God residents did not have to spend money to avert the disaster. After joining the Purple Yang Palace, although they would have to draw a clear line between them and the current Hong Emperor, Huang Liang promised Madame Xiaowan that he would stretch the less than 900 miles White Swan River to 1,200 miles within 100 years. The Water God Manor would pay the money, but all the resistance from the imperial court of the Yellow Ting Nation and the desperate counterattacks of the mountain and water gods who had their providence stolen, the Purple Yang Manor could also help them settle it. The Water God Manor only needed to hire the cultivators of the Purple Yang Manor according to the market price, and they could suppress and kill their way through. It was probably the same as Madame Xiaowan facing Wu Yi in the small courtyard. Old Flood Dragon, who was dressed and looked no different from the world's great scholars, opened his palm again and frowned. "What can I see from this?" Wu Yi quietly looked over. She saw her father condensing the essence of the mist in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth with his magical ability. His palm was full of water droplets, as if they had just been picked from the lotus leaves after the rain. Then, those water droplets exploded in her father's palm at the same time, turning into a puddle of rain. Her father stared at it for a long time, but he still couldn't figure it out. In Wu Yi's mind, her father, who was knowledgeable and didn't lose to the sage of the Confucian Academy, seemed to hesitate for a moment. He stretched out his other palm and poured the water droplets from his palm into it. In an instant, Wu Yi saw a golden light flash in her father's palm. Before Wu Yi could take a closer look, her father had already quickly clenched his fist. Wu Yi could no longer see the scene in her father's palm. The old man thought for a moment, then smiled at Wu Yi. "There's nothing to see." Wu Yi naturally didn't dare to get to the bottom of it. The old man asked, "Do you know why all sentient beings in the world are tirelessly pursuing human skin? The body of the Illuminati is so weak that even eating grains in order to survive has become an obstacle to cultivation. Therefore, Qi trainers pay attention to fasting, lest the stench disturbs the gods and causes the fetus to wither, making it impossible for them to recover their nascent soul. On the other hand, we flood dragons are blessed by nature. Not only are we born with a strong body, but our spiritual intelligence is also no worse than that of humans. Why are you and I standing here in human form? Wu Yi was a little confused and didn't dare to speak rashly because it was common knowledge among all the cultivators and mountain spirits on the mountain that the aperture acupoints of a person's cave was of fairyland. However, her father would never talk nonsense with her, so where was the mystery? The old man didn't embarrass Wu Yi, who didn't have many children left in this world. The mystery is only in one word: still. The old man stretched out a finger and drew a circle in the air. Wu Yi was lost in thought. The old man smiled and said, "You are still young and inexperienced. Let alone the scene 3,000 years ago, even 10,000 years ago, if I don't tell you, where can you find the answer?" Wu Yi's expression was solemn. She knew that her father was teaching her the opportunity to reach the Tao. She had been stagnant in the Golden Core realm for more than 300 years. As a descendant of the Flood Dragon, the unorthodox Taoist technique that could allow cultivators to reach the nascent soul realm. Not only did she not achieve twice the result with half the effort, but she also stumbled. It was not easy for her to reach the peak of the Golden Core realm. After more than 100 years, the bottleneck of the Golden Core realm began to stagnate, which made her despair. The old man looked up at the sky. "Aren't you curious? Today, the 3 sects, the 100 schools of thought, and the 3 worlds. Where did so many mortal teachers come from? Why did they come? How did they become the masters of the world in the end? Well, the last point is that there are a lot of rumors in the mountains. Some are far and some are close to the truth. You might have a rough understanding of it." Wu Yi nodded. 3,000 years ago, the last true dragon in the world escaped from the central divine continent. Relying on its innate ability to control the water of the world, it chose to go ashore at the southernmost old dragon city of the Aquarius continent. During the journey, it was severely injured and crashed into the ground, forcefully opening up a dragon path. In the small world of the human body, in the water mansion with the water seal, the children in green stopped what they were doing and held their breath. Outside the mansion with the golden script, the true chief fire dragon was sleeping soundly. Inside the mansion, a small figure in a golden Confucian robe was carrying a long sword on his back and a few small golden books on his waist. The golden light on his body was getting more and more condensed, shining brightly, like the golden body of a god. However, the little figure in a Confucian robe with golden light flowing all over its body was constantly emitting bits and pieces of golden brilliance. Obviously, it was not stable. It was full of expectations, looking forward to the moment when Chen Pingan stopped on the railing. Chen Pingan was still walking slowly. This time when they left the Cliff Academy, Chen Pingan asked Zhu Lian and Shi Ro a question on the way. If killing a good person who did nothing wrong could save 10 people, would they save or not? The two shook their heads. When Chen Pingan increased the number from saving 10 people to saving 1,000 or 10,000 people, Shi Ro began to hesitate. Only Zhu Lian said that even if he could save the whole world, he would not kill that person. Chen Pingan asked why. Zhu Lian smiled and gave the answer, "I am worried that I will be the one who will be killed." Zhu Lian then turned around and asked Chen Pingan for his answer. Chen Pingan said that he could not give an answer. Unless he really reached that step, it was possible to know his own heart and choice. In the Qi residence, the little figure in a golden Confucian robe was a little anxious. Several times, it wanted to rush out of the mansion and out of the small world of the human body to reward Chen Pingan with a few big chestnuts. "You are wrong. Why are you thinking about these big problems that are destined to have no results for the time being? Don't neglect your proper work. Don't let a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity pass by. The general direction that you've been thinking about is the correct one. Quickly think about the important word, slow, the word that is ignored by the secular world. Think further and deeper. As long as you think it through, your heart will be connected. This will be the opportunity for you, Chin Pingon, to reach the upper 5 realms in the future. Only these nine, however, if it told Chin Pingon directly, it would make Chin Pingon fall into a very bad state of mind. Chin Pingon finally stopped on the railing. The little figure in a golden Confucian robe and the boys in green in the 2 mansions were full of expectations. Then, the green-clothed boys looked at each other in dismay and suddenly burst into laughter. It turned out that after Chin Pingon stood still, his pure thoughts at that moment were actually starting to miss a girl. His thoughts were not so gentlemanly. He was thinking that the next time he met her at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, it would not be just holding hands. He had to be bolder. If Miss Ning was not willing, he would just beat her up and scold her. He believed that the 2 of them would still be together. But what if Miss Ning was actually willing and was waiting for him, Chin Pingon, to take the initiative? You are a big man. Don't you have any boldness? Is it appropriate for you to be so hesitant? Chin Pingon jumped down from the railing. He was sleepy. When he walked towards the house, he clapped his fists and kept encouraging himself. It's not appropriate. It's definitely not appropriate. Besides, it's not like you haven't hugged Miss Ning at the inverted mountain. It's just that you were so dazed that you can't remember anything. How can you do this? Kiss on the lips. Chin Pingon, are you looking for death? You can't think about this. This is too fast. Didn't you think so much just now? It's better to slow down with Miss Ning. He also told Chin Pingon that ancestor Yuan Jun had already left for Hanxi River. However, before she left, she said that when Chin Pingon and the others left Purple Sun Mansion, they could choose one item from the 1st to the 4th floor of the Purple Chi Palace's treasure vault as a farewell gift from Purple Sun Mansion. If Chin Pingon did not accept it, it was fine. As the mansion lord, he could choose the 4 most precious items in front of Chin Pingon and smash them on the spot. Chin Pingon could not guess what Wu Yi was up to. This kind of shameless hospitality was too unreasonable. Even Wei Pai did not have such a big face. Naturally, Chin Pingon wanted to leave this troublesome place immediately. It did not matter if Wu Yi smashed the 4 treasures or not. First, Wu Yi was trying to please him for no reason, and then Madame Xiaoluan came knocking on his door at night. Chin Pingon had a psychological shadow about Purple Sun Mansion. However, Huang Mang seemed to have expected this. He did not care about his face at all. He imitated his own patriarch and put on a shameless face, saying, "Whether I, Huang Mang, can still be the mansion lord is all up to young Master Qin. Is young Master Qin not willing to let me go on a tour for 1 or 2 days and let the Purple Sun Mansion play host to me? Would young Master Qin just watch Huang Mang lose his position as mansion lord?" After a discussion with Zhu Lian and Shi Rou, Chin Pingon decided to stick to the status quo. He promised Huang Chu to stay for 1 more day and enjoy the scenery nearby. However, when Purple Sun Mansion sent someone to lead the way, Chin Pingon was filled with regret. Zhu Lian, on the other hand, was obviously gloating. He did not think that it was a bad thing. It turned out that Madame Xiaoluan, who had regained her graceful demeanor, was in charge of leading Chin Pingon and his party to sightsee. Chin Pingon braced himself and boarded a ship docked at the bank of the Taipan River, sailing upstream. In the night, the party returned to Purple Sun Mansion. Wu Yi stood in the small courtyard of Madame Xiaoluan's residence and asked with a smile, "How was it?" Madame Xiaoluan wanted to say something but stopped. Wu Yi looked unhappy and said, "Just say it." Madame Xiaoluan sighed. "Along the way, I've been hinting at him in every possible way. After that, I even confessed my feelings to him. Chen Pingon didn't give me a good look from beginning to end. He didn't even speak a word. However, before we got off the ship, Chen Pingon said 2 sentences to me. Wu Yi asked curiously, what 2 sentences? Madame Xiaowan smiled bitterly and said, the first sentence was, Madame Xiaowan, do you want to kill me on purpose? Wu Yi was confused. Madame Xiaowan was a bit uneasy. The second sentence, Chen Pingon said very seriously, if you continue to pester me like this, I will kill you with 1 punch. Wu Yi stretched out 2 fingers and rubbed her temples. Madame Xiaowan covered her mouth and giggled. Ruan Xiu asked, I heard that there is a child from the Mud Bottle Alley in the Book Slip Lake. Song Langzhong nodded and said, surnamed Gu, he is a child with a great opportunity. He was accepted as a closed-door disciple by Lu Jimao, the true lord of the Book Slip Lake. Gu can also brought a big loach to the Book Slip Lake with the Flood Dragon Retainer whose combat power is equivalent to the Yuanying stage. At a young age, he is very famous. Even the Zhuiying dynasty has heard that there is such a master and servant in the Book Slip Lake. Once chatting with Mr. Su laughed and said that this little guy named Gu Ken is simply a natural mountain cultivator. Ruan Xiu raised her wrist and looked at the sleeping fire dragon that was shaped like a bright red bracelet. She put down her arm thoughtfully. A middle-aged man came to the edge of the Book Slip Lake. It was a prosperous city with a sea of people, called Pool Water City. Along the way, he hired a carriage. The coachman was a talkative old man who had traveled extensively. The man was generous and liked to listen to lively and interesting stories. He did not like to sit in the carriage and enjoy life. He sat next to the old coachman for almost half of the journey. The old coachman drank a lot of wine and was in a good mood. He also talked a lot about the strange things he heard about the Book Slip Lake. He said that the place was not as terrible as the rumors outside. There were fights and killings, but most of them would not be involved. However, it was true that the Book Slip Lake was a big money-squandering place. Once, he and his friends drove a group of rich young masters from the Zhuiying dynasty. They were very arrogant and asked them to wait in Pool Water City. They said that they would return in a month. However, in less than 3 days, the group of young masters returned to the city from the Book Slip Lake by boat. They were penniless. 7 or 8 young people and 600,000 taels of silver were wasted in 3 days. However, according to the words of the spendthrifts, it seemed that they were not satisfied. They said that they would come back to the Book Slip Lake after saving some money in half a year. The man walked on the crowded street of Pool Water City. He was very inconspicuous. Previously, there was a team of Qi trainers guarding the city gate. They did not need any documents to pass the customs. They only needed to pay to enter. Pool Water City was built on the west bank of the Book Slip Lake. The Book Slip Lake was very vast. More than 1,000 islands of various sizes were scattered all over the place. Most importantly, it was full of spiritual qi. It was very difficult to establish a sect here and occupy a large area of islands and water. However, if 1 or 2 earth immortals of the Jindan realm occupied a larger island, it would be the most suitable place to live and cultivate. It was not only peaceful but also like a small cave. Especially for those Qi trainers who practiced the Dharma access close to water, some of the islands in the Book Slip Lake were places that they must fight for. The man with a sword on his back chose a restaurant in the downtown area and ordered a pot of the Wailing Crow wine, the most famous wine in Pool Water City. After drinking the wine and listening to some of the lively conversations at the tables nearby, he did not learn anything else. There was only one thing that was useful. After some time, the Book Slip Lake seemed to be holding an island master meeting that was held once every 100 years. They were going to elect a new Jianghu sovereign, who had been vacant for 300 years. After finishing the wine and the meal, the man paid the bill with the waiter and left the restaurant. He asked for directions and went to a pool water city. There was a Wailing Ape Street that was open to everyone. The street was 4 miles long and was guarded by chi trainers at both ends. They did not care about one's identity and only recognized money to clear the way. In this aspect, it was somewhat similar to Old Dragon City, which was famous for its trade and commerce. There were people who laughed without hatred and people who were rich. If you don't believe me, you can look at the wine in the cup. The cup is for the rich first. If that was the case, it seemed that the way of the world was the same everywhere. The middle-aged man with a red wine gourd hanging on his waist. Previously, the old coachman told him that he did not need to worry if he could speak the language of the entire continent in the Book Slip Lake where good and bad people mix together. However, on the way, he still learned some dialect of the Book Slip Lake from the old coachman. Although he did not learn much, he could still ask for directions and bargain. The middle-aged man wandered around and looked around. He did not amaze the world with a single brilliant feat by sweeping away the pricey treasures of the shops. He also did not just look but did not buy. He picked a few spiritual weapons that were convenient but not expensive. He behaved like the ordinary chi trainers who came from other places. He was just here to join in the fun. He would not be looked down upon by others but would not be looked down upon by the locals either. In the end, the middle-aged man stopped at a small shop that sold antiques and miscellaneous items. The items were good but the price was not very fair. The shopkeeper looked like an old-fashioned man who did not do business. Therefore, the business was relatively quiet. Many people came and went. There were very few people who took out money from their pockets. The man stood in front of an ancient bronze sword that was placed horizontally on a special sword rack and did not move for a long time. The scabbard was placed separately and the body of the sword was engraved with the words, "Great Imitation of Chu Huang." Looking at the man in a long robe and carrying a sword on his back who bent over and looked carefully, the old shopkeeper said impatiently, "What are you looking at? Can you afford it?" Even the imitation sword of Chu Huang in ancient times costs a lot of money. Go away. If you really want to look at it, go somewhere else. A middle-aged man. His wallet was not bulging and his back was not straight. Instead, he turned to the old man and asked with a smile, "Shopkeeper, this Chu Huang is one of the 8 horses that pulled the carriage that the Sage of Rites and the first monarch of the human world rode on when they toured the world together." The old shopkeeper glanced at the long sword on the man's back, and his expression turned slightly better. "At least you're not so bad that you're blind." "That's right, it's the Chu Huang where the 8 horses scattered." Later on, there was a great swordsmith from the Central Plains who used his life's effort to forge 8 famous swords and named them after the 8 horses. The man looked back at the painting hanging on the wall and then turned his head to look at the old shopkeeper, asking if there was no room for discussion. The old shopkeeper sneered and nodded. The man turned his head again and glanced at the painting of a lady, then glanced at the empty shop and the door. Only then did he walk to the counter, flipped his wrist, and slapped 3 small coins on the table. He covered it with his palm and pushed it to the old shopkeeper. The old shopkeeper also glanced at the door of the shop. The moment the man raised his hand, the old man quickly covered it with his palm and pulled it to his side. He raised his hand and confirmed that it was indeed 3 small coins. Then he grabbed it in his palm and put it in his sleeve. He looked up and smiled. "This time I misjudged you. You're good, kid. You have some ability. You can make me misjudge you." The man smiled helplessly. "Then I'll go over there and pick 3 things that I like." The old shopkeeper laughed heartily and walked out from behind the counter. "Go ahead. When doing business, you still need to have some integrity. I'll help you put this painting into a box. Don't worry, Just the box alone is worth 2 snowflakes. I won't spoil such a precious painting. The man's gaze wandered around the treasure shelf at the door. The old shopkeeper carefully took down the painting and kept it in a treasure box. He kept looking at the man from the corner of his eyes. Damn, if I knew that this fellow was so rich and generous, I wouldn't have pulled out such a prize. Furthermore, he picked 3 items in one go. He was starting to feel heartache. When the man picked 2 items, the old shopkeeper was slightly relieved. He didn't lose much. However, when the man finally picked a black jade that hadn't been carved by a famous master yet, the old shopkeeper looked at him with a smile. The old shopkeeper's eyelids trembled as he hurriedly asked, "Kid, what's your surname again?" The man was originally hesitant, but when the old shopkeeper said this, he decisively took it and smiled. "My surname is Chin." The old shopkeeper said pitifully, "Then I will change my surname to Chin from now on. Can you put it back?" The man smiled and shook his head. "You have to be sincere when doing business." The old shopkeeper said angrily, "I think you should stop being a dog-shit ranger and become a businessman. In a few years, you will be filthy rich." Although the old shopkeeper said this, he still made a lot of money and was in a good mood. He poured a cup of tea for the customer surnamed Chin. That person didn't have the intention to leave immediately. One was thinking about whether or not he could sell that imitation Chu Huang again, the other wanted to hear more about the deeper matters of the book Slip Lake from the old shopkeeper. Just like this, they drank tea and chatted. The man knew a lot of things that the old coachman didn't know. That's right. The calligraphy lake was a paradise for cultivators. Smart people would be able to survive here while stupid people would be miserable. Here, there was no difference between good and bad cultivators. There was only a difference in cultivation level and a difference in the depth of one's schemes. Trade is flourishing, shops are everywhere, and there are all kinds of strange things. Those who had nowhere else to go or those who were in dire straits could often find a place to stay here. Of course, if they wanted to be comfortable and happy, they could forget about it. But as long as you have a pig's head and find the right temple, it won't be difficult to survive. How well you do in the future depends on your own ability. Relying on a big mountain and providing money and strength is also a way out. In the history of the Book Lake, there were people who endured humiliation for many years and finally rose to become the overlord of a region. Outside the shop, time passed slowly. Most importantly, this female cultivator was said to have a great background. She was the favored concubine of a nascent sword cultivator from the Zhuang dynasty in her early years. Han Jingling, the prince of the Stonehair country, and Huang He, the son of the great general. Gu Kan, Fan Yen, and Qin Fan. Pop. Su Su. Lushing #. Kaka. Pingzhu. If Xia apologizes to you. Luo. Aside from Lord Tianhu, who was forcefully pulled into the group by Gu Kan, the other 8 people were like-minded. It was said that under Gu Kan's suggestion, they caught a huge rooster from somewhere and drank its blood to form an alliance. They became brothers and were known as the 10 heroes of Book Lake. Not to mention Book Lake, even the other 8 people were muttering to themselves. There were obviously 9 of them, so why did they announce to the public that there were 10 heroes? At that time, the little devil, Gu Kan, was only barefooted as she stood on the second chair. She jumped up and down and pointed at the empty first chair. She grinned and said that she would keep that seat for now. Gu Kan was not old, but after she came to Book Lake, she grew a lot taller like bamboo shoots after the rain. She was only a teenager, but she was already as tall as a teenager of 14 or 15 years old. There was a rumor that the flood dragon, which liked to eat chi cultivators as food, could nourish the body of Gu Kan. On Verdant Canyon Island, the only assassination that was close to success was when the assassin heavily slashed the back of Gu Kan. If it was an ordinary person, he would have died on the spot. Even if it was a chi cultivator in the lower 5 states, he would not be able to get out of bed without 2 or 3 years of recuperation. However, in less than half a month, the little devil came out of the mountain again. She sat on the head of the flood dragon, which she called Little Loach, and wandered happily in Book Lake. On this day, overlooking Book Lake from a tall building in Pondwater City, one could see a huge ship sailing slowly towards it. The ship was as big as the city wall of Pondwater City. Around the ship, except for the waves caused by the ship, there were subtle ripples on the surface of the lake more than 1,000 feet away from the ship. There was a guy who looked like a teenager, who was wearing a fitting dark green robe, sitting barefooted on the railing at the bow of the ship, swinging his legs. Every once in a while, he would habitually sniff. It seemed that he had grown taller over the years. However, there were still 2 lines of snot on his face. He had to put the 2 little azure dragons back into the cave residence. There were 3 people standing behind him. The eldest senior sister, Tian Hu, was now in charge of the life and death of nearly 10,000 people on Verdant Canyon Island and the Vassal Islands. She already had a majestic aura similar to that of immortal Jiang Jia. Chui. Finally, he turned his head and smiled. A young man should have vitality. Why are you more lethargic than me now? Chui Dongshan closed his eyes. His face was covered in tears. He whispered softly, I hope that Mr. State of Mind will be like spring all year round, like spring all year round. The ship by the lake had already docked. The middle-aged man with the surname Chin stood under the willow tree with withered yellow leaves in the distance. In the end, he did not drink. After putting the wine pot back on his waist, he hesitated. He was 17 years old this year. Chui stood up, stretched out a hand, and said with a smile, please enter the trap. In the eyes of the tens of thousands of cultivators in Book Slip Lake, the only thing Gu Kan and Lu Kaisang had in common was that both of them had a good master. But the 2 of them had a good relationship. Gu Kan still had his hands in his sleeves. He suddenly hit Lu Kaisang with his elbow and said in a low voice, if you go to my hometown and happen to have no cultivation, I dare say that when you walk in the alley, you will definitely be chased by those lecherous bachelors who happen to pass by and touch you. At that time, you will cry and run to my door, knocking hard on the door, saying Gu Kan, it's not good, there are men who want to take off my clothes. I'm so happy just thinking about it. But do you know what's even more fun? After those bastards take off your pants, they will curse you and say that you have a penis. Do you know what's the most fun? It's when they grit their teeth and make up their minds to flip you over and do you on the spot. Ouch, I can't. My stomach hurts. Gu Kan walked with his head down and waist bent, laughing. Lu Caisang's face was cold. Disgusting. The 2 of them sat in the carriage one after another. Lu Kaisang asked softly, why did you change into this outfit? I thought you didn't like to dress so fancy before. Gu Kan closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Lu Kaisang hesitated for a moment. Yuan is a very shrewd person. His mother is related to a nascent soul sword cultivator in Zhuiying dynasty. Many people in Book Slip Lake think that Huang Xiaolong is deliberately scaring people, but my master said that this matter is absolutely true. Yuan's mother's earliest identity is that powerful sword cultivator's favorite concubine. Although there is no way to give her a status, the relationship is definitely still there. You must be careful. Once you kill Yuan, who has evil intentions, it means that you will be targeted by a nascent soul sword cultivator. Gu Kan didn't open his eyes, but the corners of his mouth curled up. Don't think of Yuan as such a bad person. Lu Kaisang said angrily, I'm doing this for your own good. If you don't care, you will suffer losses. Yuan's family is the kind of bad people who like to secretly harm people. Gu Kan finally opened his eyes and asked, no matter how bad Yuan is, can he be compared to me, Gu Kan? Lu Kaisang suddenly covered his mouth and laughed. Gu Kan imitated his tone and said sweetly, disgusting. Lu Kaisang suddenly felt a little sad. He looked at Gu Kan, this child, who changed every year. Who would dare to treat him as a child? Even his master, one of the few old cultivators who could make perfected cultivator Jie Jiang afraid, said that Gu Kan was a freak. Unless he suddenly died one day and accidentally fulfilled the Bulsh *T saying that those who commit evil are doomed to destruction, once he gathered the general forces that had little to do with Verdant Canyon Island, even the immortals of the upper 5 realms might not dare to provoke him. They would sacrifice themselves for others, they would be happy for others, they would be willing to die for others, they would be willing to die for others, they would be willing to sacrifice themselves for others, they would be willing to sacrifice themselves for others, they would be willing to sacrifice themselves for others, they would be willing to help others climb to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would go to the top of the mountain, they would smash those gods who looked down on the human world and treated the fate of the human race as food for incense. Cui Dong smiled again and said, but this is only half of the human nature. The other half of human nature is that a person is born to know that in order to survive, they can do anything. No matter how humble I am unique in this world. So countless I want to live longer, and live better. We don't know that we actually already know that one. We rely on our instinct of being raised by the gods to fight for it. Since there is only 1 we can only fight for what is in the hands of others. We can make our one bigger and more numerous. There is no end to this pursuit. Cui Dong stretched out his finger and pointed at Chen Pingan and the carriage. Gu Kan may not have known about Chen Pingan's difficulties, just like Chen Pingan may not have known about Qi Jingchuan's thoughts in the past. Cui Dong withdrew his hand and asked with a smile, then take a guess. Last time, when Qi Jingchun held an umbrella for Chen Pingan and walked on the street outside the Yang family's drugstore, Qi Jingchun had already told Chen Pingan not to feel guilty in the future. However, I think the most important thing to consider is whether this young man in Mud Bottle Alley had already guessed that he was the key chess piece that killed Qi Jingchun. Cui Dong turned his head and shook his head with a smile. Cui Dong had already isolated all his observation and divine awareness. Cui Dong continued to look at the 2 scrolls. Old scholar, if you saw these, what would you say? Yes, you would tug at your beard and say, this isn't good. Cui Dong suddenly mocked, in such a big Tongyi continent, only Sun Yuan is not blind. How incredible. Cui Dongshan lay there stiffly like a dead man. Cui Dong turned his head. What was written in that brocade pouch of yours? This is the only thing I'm curious about. Don't play dead. I know that even if you sealed off the longevity bridge, you can still guess my thoughts. Cui Dongshan, you still have this bit of intelligence. Cui Dongshan did not move and played dead until the end. On the most crowded busy street in Pool Water City, a soul-stirring siege took place in a place where no assassination should have taken place. Gu Kan, who had a telepathic connection with it, just frowned and was slapped in the face by the man. That man said, "Say that again." LV Kaisang opened her mouth wide. Almost everyone on the street was the same. That man suddenly raised his hand and slapped Gu Kan's face. His voice trembled, but he said sternly, "Gu Kan. Say that again." Gu Kan turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. Then, he tilted his head. His cheeks were red and swollen, but his eyes were full of laughter. "Haha, Chen Pin gone. You're here." Therefore, no matter how insensible I was or how angry I was, he would not refuse to acknowledge me as his little brother. But it's different now. Mother and I have lived very well. He will feel that even without Chen Pin gone, we can still live very well. Therefore, he will continue to be angry and ignore me for the rest of his life. But I want to tell him that it's not like this. Without Chen Pin gone, I will be very sad. I will be sad for the rest of my life. If Chen Pin gone doesn't care about me, I will not stop him. I will only tell him that if he dares to ignore me, I will be an even bigger villain. I will do even more bad things. I will do so that no matter where Chen Pin gone goes to in the Aquarius continent, to the Tongya continent, or the Central Divine continent, you will hear Gu Kan's name. Gu Kan stretched out her hands and covered her face. This was the second time that Gu Kan showed such a weak side after coming to the Book Slip Lake. The first time was when she celebrated the Mid-Autumn Festival with her mother on Verdant Gorge Island. She also mentioned Chen Pin gone. Little Loach and Gu Kan's hearts were connected. All the joys and sorrows would follow, so it also shed tears. The ship finally arrived at Verdant Gorge Island. When they disembarked, Chen Pin gone took out a jade token and handed it to Little Loach. Chen Pin gone said in a deep voice, "Give it to Lu Jimao. Tell him to keep it first and return it to me when I leave Verdant Gorge Island. Tell him one more thing. When I'm on Verdant Gorge Island, don't let me see him." When it took the jade token, it was like a child grabbing a handful of red-hot charcoal. Suddenly, it screamed through the sky. It almost transformed into a flood dragon that was hundreds of feet long. It wanted to smash the ferry of Verdant Gorge Island with its claws. Just when it was about to throw it away, Chen Pin gone said expressionlessly, "Take it." Little Loach was full of fear. It endured the pain and still held the strange jade token that was engraved with the words, "I'm good at nurturing the Great Spirit." It went to look for perfected cultivator Jiang Jia. There were already people waiting at the ferry. They were all bowing and currying favor with Gu Kan. Chen Pin gone said to Gu Kan, "Please tell Auntie that I want to have a home-cooked meal. A bowl of rice will be fine." Gu Kan nodded vigorously. As long as Chen Pin gone was willing to sit down and eat, it would be fine. She asked an old cultivator housekeeper of Verdant Gorge Island to inform her mother to prepare a table of ordinary home-cooked meals instead of fish and meat. Gu Kan led the way while Chen Pin gone walked beside her slowly. Gu Kan thought that Chen Pin gone wanted to be able to eat as soon as they arrived at the mansion. He was eager to walk around for a while, so she deliberately slowed down her pace. Chen Pin gone suddenly said, "I've been in Pond Water City for the past few days. I asked a lot of people about you and Verdant Gorge Island and heard a lot of things." Gu Kan's head drooped. "I guessed it." Chen Pin gone said again, "There are some things that I'm afraid I won't be able to say when we're at the dining table. So before I see Auntie, I might say some things that you won't like to hear. I hope you won't like to hear them. I don't care whether you think they're nonsense or not. Can you listen to me first? After I'm done, you can say what's in your heart. I hope you won't be like that assassin. Don't worry about whether I'll like to hear it or not. I just want to hear what's in your heart. Just say what's in your mind. Gu Ken nodded. Go on, I'm listening. Chen Pingan said slowly, I'm sorry, I'm late. Gu Ken stopped at once. Chen Pingan also stopped. In the eyes of all the curious cultivators on Verdant Gorge Island, he was a middle-aged man with a dispirited look. His face could not be seen, but his eyes revealed his heart. That kind of tiredness could not be concealed. I just want Gu Kan to live a good life. It's also because of this that we have the chance to live today and wait for you, Chen Pingan, to tell us that my husband, Gu Kan's father, is still alive and that we have the chance to reunite as a family. Chen Pingan, can you understand what I'm saying? Won't you blame me for being short-sighted? Chen Pingan nodded and said, I can understand. I won't blame Auntie. Person F looked into Chen Pingan's eyes. She poured herself a glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. Then, she poured another glass and drank it again. You came to find Ken-er. No matter what you said, Ken-er was very happy. I want to drink a glass. You told us the news, so I want to drink a glass too. We're all happy. Person F poured a third glass of wine. After drinking it, she said with tears in her eyes, Chen Pingan, I want to drink a glass to see that you've grown taller, grown up, and are safe and sound. I'm happy for your parents. Chen Pingan picked up the wine pot and poured himself a glass of wine. He raised his head and drank it. In a tall building in Pond City, Chui. TSK, he said, you're short-sighted. This person F from Clay Bottle Alley is not ordinary. No wonder she can partner with Lu Jimao and teach someone like Gu Kan. When Chen Pingan followed the two carriages into the city, Chui Dongshan had been pretending to be dead. However, when Chen Pingan appeared and met Gu Kan, Chui Dongshan had already opened his eyes. Everything that happened after that had nothing to do with Chui. Similarly, Chui Dongshan had seen and heard all of it. Chui. He smiled and said, what Chen Pingan said is futile. Even if they were both from Clay Bottle Alley, they knew the taste of suffering at first. But now, Gu Kan and Chen Pingan were two completely different people. Not only were their standpoints different, but the way they looked at the world, the most fundamental context was very different. Chen Pingan could empathize with Gu Kan only because Chen Pingan had walked a longer path. Gu Kan, on the other hand, did not. For him, his hometown, Clay Bottle Alley, and then to book Slip Lake, was the entire martial world and the world. What's more, Gu Kan was obsessed with sex. He was born to go to extremes. Not to mention Chen Pingan, even if Gu Kan's father, Gu Tao, stood in Chen Pingan's position, he would not be able to change Gu Kan's mind. This was the fun part. Gu Kan's extreme behavior made him have deep feelings for Chen Pingan. That was why he said, even if you beat me to death, I won't fight back. This was the devil incarnate's heartfelt words. How rare was it? Chen Pingan knew, so he was in more pain. Chen Pingan even heard about the person who was about to die, Lu Xianwei. Before he died, Lu Xianwei did not blame Chen Pingan at all. Instead, he only said to him, Chen Pingan, I don't want to die. I really don't want to die. That was why Chen Pingan was in more pain now. That's how people are. A frog at the bottom of a well will complain about injustice. A person who has left the bottom of the well will say anything to the people below, but to the people who are still at the bottom of the well, it's all empty talk. Because deep in their hearts, they will keep telling themselves that their words are for the snow of spring, not for people who have been rolling in the mud for a long time. If they really listen to them, they will be courting death. However, Chen Pingan has already realized this. That's why what he said on the way to Gu Kan's mansion and what he said at the dinner table after eating that bowl of rice were worlds apart. Unfortunately, Gu Kan was still too young when he was in Mud Bottle Alley. He did not see Chen Pingan's situation at his age, nor did he see with his own eyes the suffering that Chen Pingan suffered during his long journey. What Gu Kan saw was Chen Pingan carrying a sword on his back and giving Little Loach a jade pendant. It was the Chen Pingan who understood so many things. As for why Chen Pingan was able to get to where he was today, Gu Kan did not understand. This child might not really be willing to understand either. On the other hand, Chen Pingan was willing to think more and more about it. That was why he could only make things even messier. If the two of them were reversed and their positions were swapped, Chen Pingan would be Gu Kan's ex-character and go far. Gu Kan would be Chen Pingan's ex-character and survive in Verdant Canyon Island. Today's situation would not be so hopeless. However, if that was the case, we would not be sitting here at all. Chui. He said to Chui Dongshan, actually, your teacher has already done quite well. Chui Dongshan's face was stern. Can you still see beautiful things in your old dog eyes? Chui. He did not take it seriously and smiled. The most beautiful thing that Chen Pingan did on this trip to Verdant Canyon Island is the 2 words that you have said. It is the sword above the 2 words that you have said. It is the sword above the 2 words, cut off and circle. On the ship, we first took out the only thing that Chen Pingan and Gu Kan had in common and placed it in front of them. Otherwise, Chen Pingan would have already lost on the ship, and you and I would have been able to leave Pondwater City. That was to test the assassin first. Not only was he trying his best to understand the hearts of the people in Book Lake, but he was also trying to tell Gu Kan that the assassin deserved to be killed no matter where he was. Furthermore, he, Chen Pingan, was willing to listen to Gu Kan's own reasoning. If Chen Pingan deliberately put himself at the top of the moral spectrum and tried to influence Gu Kan, then Gu Kan might directly feel that Chen Pingan is no longer the Chen Pingan of the past, and everything is over. After getting off the ship, we put the jade pendant of the Saint of Literature Temple in front of Lu Jimao, who is a nascent soul cultivator and has high standards, so that perfected cultivator Jiang Jia will not dare to mess things up. When we are at the dining table and have dinner, we will remove the F character, who is Gu Kan's mother, so that she will not be too involved and affect Gu Kan too much. Otherwise, it will be a mess. After Chen Pingan joins, it will only get messier. Chui Dongshan sneered and said, even so, is it useful? Isn't it still a dead end? Chui. He nodded and said, but as long as Chen Pingan can't get over the hurdle in his heart, whatever he does next will be a new knot in his heart. Even if Gu Kan is willing to lower her head and admit her mistake, so what? After all, there were so many innocent people who had died in vain. They would be like ghosts that refused to leave Chen Pingan's heart. They would knock on the door and shout for justice. Day and night, they would question Chen Pingan's conscience. The first difficulty is whether Gu Kan is willing to admit her mistake. The second difficulty was how Chen Pingan was going to figure out all the principles he had read in books, heard from others, and figured out on his own. He was going to find the foundation of his own principles. The third difficulty was whether he would realize that he was wrong after knowing everything, and whether he would be able to stay true to his heart. The fourth difficulty is how Chen Pingan will do it. The third and fourth difficulty is the hardest. The third difficulty is that Chen Pingan is destined to fail. Chui Dongshan directly asked Chen Pingan about the last obstacle in his heart. The fourth difficulty. Chui. He seemed to be deliberately mystifying and said, the difficulty is that there are countless difficulties. Chui Dongshan responded with a sneer. Chui. He did not think much of it. If Chen Pingan really has the ability to be in the fourth difficulty, after we finish reading this difficulty, we will be able to understand why there are so many idiots and bad people in the world, and why everyone knows so many things, but still lives worse than dogs. Then, it will become Zhu Lu, Dolly's queen, Du Mao. Why can't we be Qi Jingchen, Alliance? But it's a pity that Chen Pingan will not be able to reach this step, because if he reaches this step, Chen Pingan will have already lost. If you are interested, you can stay here and slowly watch your master become skinny and haggard. As for me, I will have left long ago. Cui Dongshan said, "Oh, are you leaving here in a hurry to be reincarnated?" Cui. He laughed, stretched out a finger and pointed at Cui Dongshan. You have to learn from your master, learn to be calm, learn to control your anger, then you can restrain yourself. Cui. He looked at the scroll on the ground again. I think Gu Can still won't admit her mistakes. What do you think? Cui Dongshan closed his eyes again, not pretending to be dead, but waiting for death. Cui. He said to himself, it said that there is no banquet in the world that lasts forever. Some banquets are still there when the people are not there, just waiting for them to take their seats. But at this table in Verdant Canyon Island, even if the people are still there, the banquet has already ended. Everyone is talking about their own things, drinking their own wine. What kind of reunion banquet is this? Forget it. S3, Chen Pingan led Gu Can to a luxurious house. It was not a house with a courtyard by itself. It was right next to the room that Gu Can and Jay would occasionally stay in. Chen Pingan asked Gu Can to accompany her mother and chat more. After Gu Can closed the door, she thought for a while and did not go to find her mother, but went alone to relax. Soon, the little loach followed behind her. It told Gu Can with the voice of the Heart Lake. Lu Jimao didn't believe it at first when he saw the jade token, but after confirming its authenticity, he seemed to be scared silly. Chen Pingan thought for a moment. Maybe I'm luckier than you. I met good people at important moments. Gu Can shook her head vigorously. That's not the case. I met you too. I was so young back then. Gu Can choked her nose. Back then, I still had 2 streams of snot hanging from my nose every day. Chen Pingan frowned as if he wanted to laugh. Gu Can found an excuse and left with little Loach. After the door closed, the footsteps became softer and softer. Chen Pingan's face and spirit collapsed. After a long time, he wiped his face. There were no tears. Chen Pingan exhaled softly, walked back to the study, and sat in front of the desk. He stood up again. Chen Pingan took off the sword immortal and the blade strengthening gourd, and placed them on the side of the desk. He wrote 4 lines of words on the piece of paper that said, Judge big and small. The customs of a village. The laws of a country. The etiquette of a continent. The morality of the world. After Chen Pingan finished writing, he looked haggard. He picked up the blade-strengthening gourd and drank a mouthful of wine to help refresh himself. After that, he wrote down the words, Calligraphy Lake, after, a village custom. Gu Can returned to her room and saw that there were 3 ladies in there. One of them had been sent over by Fan Yen from Pondwater City. She was the daughter of a government official who had met with misfortune in the Stone Hair Nation. Another one had been forcibly abducted by Gu Can after her entire sect on White Scale Island was annihilated by Azure Gorge Island. The last one was an outer disciple of Weeping of Shu Island who had requested to become a lady. Gu Can sat at the table and supported her chin with one hand. She made the 3 girls stand in a row and asked, I want to ask you a question. As long as you answer truthfully, you will be rewarded. Since you dared to lie to me, I'll treat it as an appetizer for little Loach today. As for whether you will annoy me after answering truthfully, well, it's hard to say in the past, but not today. As long as you tell me the truth today, I will be happy. The three ladies with different postures, but all of them were pretty and charming. They were trembling with fear, not knowing what this little master of theirs, whose feelings were hard to predict, wanted to do. Guken asked, "Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing to become a girl? How good is it? How bad is it?" The outer disciple of the Weeping of Shu Island said, "Young master, for me, it's a great thing. Not only am I the only one who survived on the entire Weeping of Shu Island, but I also don't have to live in fear every day. Young master won't bully or kill us wantonly. Young master, you don't know how many young girls from the book Slip Lake want to be young master's maid." The second young girl, who was from a noble family of the Stone Hair Nation, hesitated for a moment. "I don't think it's a good thing, but it's not a bad thing either. After all, I was reduced to a maid from a noble family. However, it's much better than being a courtesan in a brothel or a plaything for those boorish men." The last girl, who was a direct disciple of the island lord of White Scale Island, said with a cold expression, "I wish I could cut young master into 1,000 pieces." Guken was not angry at all. He asked, "White Scale Island will be destroyed no matter what. You dared to secretly collude with the other 8 big islands and tried to besiege our Azure Gorge Island. Do you know how your sect died? It was because of stupidity. Among the 9 big islands, your White Scale Island is the closest to our Azure Gorge Island. How did your eldest senior brother become the last consecrator of Azure Gorge Island? Do you really not know? Why do you hate an outsider like me? Just because Little Loach and I killed more people? It's fine if you hate me, but you should at least be grateful that I saved you, right? Otherwise, you would have become your eldest senior brother's plaything right now. It's not like you haven't heard of his sexual fetishes." The girl gritted her teeth and said, "Grateful. I wish I could eat your eyes as a side dish to go with wine." Guken chuckled, "I didn't like you in the past, but now I think you're the most interesting one. There's a reward, a heavy reward. Among the 3 of you, you're the only one who can receive double the reward." Guken waved his hand, "You're all dismissed. Go and receive your rewards." Guken asked softly, "Little Loach, do you think I'm wrong?" Little Loach sat beside him and said gently, "No, I don't think Master and Chin Pingon are wrong. It's just that Chin Pingon is more, right? But you can't say that Master is wrong." Guken turned around and smiled, "Little Loach, your brain wasn't very good before. Why are you so smart today?" Little Loach suddenly became listless, "I'm sorry, Master." Guken laughed, "What are you sorry for? Are you afraid of Chin Pingon? Then do you think I'm afraid of Chin Pingon? I don't even feel embarrassed with my snot and tears, so what are you sorry for?" Little Loach shook his head and became happy. Guken crossed his arms and raised his eyebrows, "I'm not even afraid of Mother. In this big world, I'm only afraid of Chin Pingon. I think the 2 of us are already very heroic." Guken suddenly drooped his head, "Why didn't Chin Pingon turn a blind eye? Why did you nag me so many reasons that I definitely wouldn't listen?" Little Loach shook his head vigorously. Guken stretched out a finger, "That's why I said you're stupid." "I know." Guken said to himself, "Chin Pingon is being stupid again. He wants to give me his most precious thing. But this time, it's not food, clothes, or fun, so I'm not willing to accept it." Little Loach leaned forward and stretched out a finger, gently smoothing Guken's frown. At dawn, the sky gradually turned white. Chin Pingon, who didn't sleep last night, closed the door and left the house. He wanted to go out for a walk. Guken, who was wearing a dark green say python robe, quickly caught up. In the lake near Verdant Canyon Island, Little Loach showed his real body and slowly swam. Chin Pingon said, "I said so much yesterday because I wanted you to admit your mistakes. But later I found it difficult. It's okay. I hope you can remember what I'm going to say next because I'm not talking about King you. I'm just telling you some possibilities that you may not have thought of. If you don't want to listen, just remember it first. Maybe it will be useful someday. Can you do it? Gukhan nodded, no problem. I also remember what you said yesterday. Chen Pingon gently poked the ground with a branch in his hand and walked slowly. In the world, not everyone can be me, Chen Pingon, and not everyone can be Gukhan. It's wrong. It's because there are so many good people in the world. Chen Pingon changed the topic. If it's all you, Gukhan, then there won't be Mr. Chi in the school in our hometown. There won't be our neighbor in Mud Bottle Alley, Grandpa Lu, Grandma Lu, and Uncle Zhao who often helps your mother harvest rice and snatch water. I think it's fine without them. It's fine even if there are those things. Mom and I are alive now. At worst, I'll get beaten up by the police. Mom will get scratched by the police. Sooner or later, I'll kill them one by one. If it's the former, I'll repay them one by one. Immortal money. Rich and powerful houses. Beautiful women. I'll give you whatever you want. There won't be me in Mud Bottle Alley. Gukhan glared at him and said, that won't do. Chen Pingon, whose face was slightly pale, smiled. After a moment of silence, Chen Pingon said, Gukhan, I know you've been telling me the truth. That's why I'm willing to sit here. Now, I hope you can still tell me the truth about my last question. Sure. Do you like to kill people? Gukhan hesitated for a moment, but the corners of his mouth slowly rose. In the end, a smile spread across his face. His face was full of smiles, and his eyes were burning with sincerity. He said resolutely, yes. Gukhan's smile was bright, but she began to cry. Chen Pingon, I don't want to lie to you. Chen Pingon also smiled. He reached out his hand and helped Gukhan wipe her tears. It's fine. I think I'm wrong. My principles can't tell right from wrong. But I'm still Chen Pingon, and you're still a slug. Gukhan asked worriedly, are you angry with me? Chen Pingon shook his head, I'm not angry with you. Gukhan muttered, but you're still angry. Chen Pingon said, I'll give it a try. I won't be angry with anyone. After Gukhan left, Chen Pingon stood up and walked towards the desk, but he stopped. Just as he was about to turn around and sit at the desk to rest, he didn't want to go. He just stood there. Chen Pingon folded his hands in his sleeves and bent slightly as he thought. The old monk in the small temple in the Nanyuan kingdom once said, lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. However, Gukhan didn't feel that she was wrong. She held the knife in her heart tightly in her hand, and she had no intention of letting it go. Then, what she said to Pei Qian about yesterday's death and today's life was empty talk. It was easy to break the thief in the mountain, but difficult to break the thief in the heart. Now, Chen Pingon felt that this thief in the heart had walked from Gukhan to his side. He opened the door to his heart and stayed there. He couldn't kill her or drive her away. Because he couldn't cross the threshold of his heart. Gukhan was the person he would definitely not abandon. The eldest sword immortal, the old man named Qin Qingdu, said that he was reasonable in everything he did so that he could be unreasonable occasionally. However, Chen Pingon knew that although the old senior didn't say it out loud, the reason was still in the old senior's heart. However, even a sword immortal like him had times when he couldn't reason with someone. That was why he had no choice but to attack. Chen Pingon was somewhat at a loss. He suddenly realized that he had already said all the reasons he knew in his life. He might even have said all the reasons he wanted to say to others in the future. In a tall building in Pond Water City, Cui Dongshan muttered, good words can't persuade a damned person. Chui. He smiled and said, the wonder of the great Tao is that people like Gu Can are more outstanding than so-called mediocre good people. Chui Dongshan turned his head and stared at Chui. You didn't get anyone to secretly protect Gu Can. You deliberately instigated Gu Can to cause trouble. Chui. He asked in return, if I let someone successfully assassinate Gu Can's mother and stop Qin Pingan from going south this time, wouldn't it be a deadlock when Wanxiu accidentally injures Gu Can? But do I need to make such an arrangement? I don't. Of course, if I did that, I would lose the subtlety of the fire and the diluted charm that was worth pondering over. There would be fewer paths left for Qin Pingan to choose from. It would seem narrower and deadlier, but it would make it easier for Qin Pingan to follow him to the extreme. If he followed his heart, he could kill Gu Can with a punch or stab him to death. Otherwise, he would just end his own life. This deadlock only had one person dead. What was the point? Even if there was some meaning, it wasn't big enough. Even if you don't know how to say F***ck, I still think it's an unfair victory. Chui Dongshan was dejected. He suddenly became furious and said, Chui Dongshan, what did Qin Pingan do wrong? Chui. He smiled helplessly. Is Y immature or not? Chui Dongshan roared, you tell me. Chui. He smiled and reached out to his ear. He tilted his head and asked with a smile, as if waiting for an answer. The Holy Master, the Sage of Rites, you too are the most knowledgeable. Come, tell me. Chui Dongshan suddenly quieted down. Chui. He smiled and said, the outcome has been decided. Now, the only thing I want to know is which line of legalism you wrote in that brocade pouch. Don't be distant, cut off by law. Chui Dongshan was dazed and shook his head. It's not legalism. Chui. He nodded. It seems that it's not Buddhism either. Chui Dongshan was dumbfounded. It's not the knowledge of the 3 religions and 100 schools of thought. It's not one of the many principles. Chui. He frowned. Qin Pingan reached out with a trembling hand and took out the brocade pouch from his sleeve. Pei Qian gave it to him before they parted in Red Candle Town. He said it must be when he was at his angriest. Qin Pingan opened the brocade pouch and took out a note. It said, Qin Pingan, please don't be disappointed in this world. After Qin Pingan read it, he put it back into the brocade pouch and put it back into his sleeve. Qin Pingan turned his head to look at the night sky outside the window and muttered, I'm just disappointed in myself. Inside the tall building, Chui laughed heartily. Chui Dongshan's heart was dead. Chui. His laughter continued and he was extremely happy. This Dolly Imperial tutor Chui. It had been a long time since he was so happy. Chui Dongshan was about to stand up and walk out of the golden lightning pool that he had drawn a circle around himself. Chui suddenly narrowed his eyes. In the picture scroll, Qin Pingan picked up the blade-strengthening gourd and drank all the wine in one gulp. Then, he took out the golden wine robe and stood on the spot. The robe put on itself. Qin Pingan took out a filth-dispelling talisman and pasted it on a pillar of a house. He closed his eyes. The person was young, but he looked very dispirited and pale, but he cleaned himself up well. No matter who he looked at, his eyes were bright. He asked for the files of all the cultivators and handymen on Green Canyon Island from Lord Tianhu. He was like a bookkeeper. For 32, today, the Book Lake's verdant canyon island was calm and tranquil. The lake's surface was like a mirror, surrounded by some large and small islands. Occasionally, one could hear the cries of the cranes in the immortal's mansion. From time to time, one or two rainbows would pass by in the distant sky, accompanied by the faint rumbling of thunder. The scenery was pleasant. It was an immortal's cave. Senior Sister Tianhu wore a red half-sleeved shirt embroidered with a cloud pattern with golden thread. She walked slowly with a stack of files in her hand, heading to the house near the gate of the Verdant Canyon Island. All the cultivators who met Tianhu along the way stepped aside and saluted this beautiful female cultivator. Mr. Tianhu never responded. She was now a powerful figure in the Verdant Canyon Island. In the past few years, the strength of the Verdant Canyon Island had increased greatly. Tianhu followed Master Lu Jimao and junior brother Gu Kan to fight everywhere. Not only did she improve her cultivation through continuous bloody battles, but she also received a lot of dividends after the battles. Together with Lu Jimao's rewards, Tianhu successfully became an Earth Immortal of the Jindan realm at the end of last autumn. At that time, the Verdant Canyon Island held a grand banquet to celebrate Tianhu's promotion to Jindan realm and Immortal. Tianhu came to the door of the house and knocked on the door. She saw the young man sitting behind the desk looking up at her. The young man, wearing a hairpin and a long green robe, had a scarlet wine gourd beside the table. Tianhu, as an Earth Immortal of the Jindan realm, had been here many times. She could see that the wine gourd was not simple. It was most likely an object cast by a master to camouflage him. Something that could make a great cultivator cover up his aura must be a genuine upper-grade magic weapon, such as the sword-cultivating gourd. Tianhu and Master Lu Jimao had a secret conversation about the wine gourd. Lu Jimao's answer confirmed Tianhu's guess that it was indeed an upper-grade sword-cultivating gourd. But what made Tianhu's heart beat faster was not the sword-cultivating gourd, but the long sword left in the house next to junior brother Gu Kan's residence. Lu Jimao asserted that it was an unruly half-immortal weapon. Lu Jimao requested Mr. Tianhu to restrain all the cultivators on Verdant Canyon Island during this period of time. At least before Chen Pingon left Book Lake, they should not act as they pleased as usual. That was the first time Lord Tianhu felt a foreign thing called restraint from his master, Lu Jimao. S3, when they entered the room, the young man had already stood up and took the initiative to make an empty seat on the table. Mr. Tianhu gently placed a stack of dusty files on the table and said apologetically, "Mr. Chin, this is the third batch of secret files found from the incense room on Verdant Canyon Island. The incense room has been untouched for a long time and has been used to living a comfortable life without care of anything. Therefore, some of the files are not well kept and there are a lot of insects. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry." Chen Pingon waved his hand. "I hope Immortal Master Tian will not punish the incense room because of this. Immortal Master Tian and the incense room of Verdant Canyon Island are helping me. What do you think, Immortal Master Tian?" Mr. Tian, who originally planned to teach the three people of the incense room a lesson. However, at this moment, after seeing Chen Pingon's face and eyes, Mr. Tianhu immediately dismissed the idea. On second thought, he thought, maybe I should teach him a lesson under the table. On the surface, the Book Lake was peaceful. The cultivators of Verdant Canyon Island were used to the bloody storms of the past few years. Recently, they were really bored and had nothing to do. Mr. Tianhu, who was a dispensable disciple of Immortal Jie Jiang, was once judged by a superior cultivator who passed by Verdant Canyon Island to be a Dragon Gate cultivator who had no hope of becoming an Earth Immortal in this life. However, he suddenly jumped up and took the power. By virtue of his military achievements, he was able to occupy a snatched May Fairy Island. In the Book Lake, this was equivalent to a king who divided the territory and had a territory that truly belonged to Mr. Tianhu. Immortal Jie Zhang's fair reward and punishment was the root of Lu Jimao's success in creating the dominant structure of Verdant Canyon Island in the Book Lake. Liu Jimao was not stingy in rewarding the meritorious officials. For the juniors or those who surrendered, as long as they dared to fight, kill, and make contributions to Verdant Canyon Island, they would be rewarded equally by the ancestral hall of Verdant Canyon Island. Chen Pingan said, later, I may have to go to the supervisor of the incense room to ask some questions. Please help me pass on the message. Mr. Tian, who was frightened and immediately smiled, Mr. Chen, you are too kind. This is my duty and the honor of the incense room. Chen Pingan was silent. Seeing that Mr. Tian, who did not seem to have any intention to leave, he had to ask softly, is there anything you want to discuss with me, Immortal Master Tian? Mr. Tian, who carefully chose the words in his heart. After he had prepared a draft, he said, Master asked me to ask Mr. Chen if Mr. Chen would like to participate in the election of the Jianghu monarch in Gong Willow Island. Chen Pingan said, this is a great situation that Verdant Canyon Island won with great difficulty. It is also your book lake's own business. Of course, I won't get involved. However, I will be here to watch the fun. Mr. Tian, who was relieved. The answer of the bookkeeper in front of him, who confused most of the Verdant Canyon Island cultivators, was quite satisfactory. He should be able to stay with his master, Liu Jimao. Chen Pingan walked out of the desk and walked Mr. Tianhu to the door. Although it was the same every time, Mr. Tianhu felt flattered. After Mr. Tianhu walked away, he thought to himself, the bookkeeper, Chen Pingan, is still the same person. Maybe it's because she knows about the blade-strengthening gourd and the half-immortal weapon now. Chen Pingan returned to the desk and began to read the files of the incense room one by one. Name, place of origin, date of birth, master, family, and clan. Many of the names had been erased with a red pen according to the old rules of the incense room on Verdant Canyon Island. Every time Chen Pingan saw a name that he was looking for, he would write it in a blank book that was deliberately not engraved with words. In addition to the place of origin, there were also the positions that these people had held on Verdant Canyon Island. I'll remember it. Gu Kan reached out a hand and gently patted Mr. Tianhu's cheek. Go. Master is waiting for your news. After Mr. Tianhu left, Gu Kan turned her head and said, it's not good to keep calling you Little Loach. Let's go. I'll go to Chen Pingan's place and ask him for a name for you. Little Loach was bashful. Gu Kan smiled and said, it's not your natal name. What's there to be afraid of and shy about? On the way to that room, Gu Kan frowned and asked, that night, was the commotion in Chen Pingan's room really like what he said? Was there a problem with his chi refinement? Little Loach shook its head. Now that it was a nascent soul cultivator, it could look down on the chi refinement cultivators of the middle 5 realms from a high position. It could be said that it had seen everything clearly. It's definitely not that simple. It's just slightly better than chi deviation. It's hard to tell the reason. Chen Pingan is purely a martial artist, and he's rebuilding the longevity bridge. He's different from us, so I can't see the truth. However, Chen Pingan was seriously injured that night. Master can also see that it's not just his soul, but also his mental state. Go on. Gu Kan stopped and fell silent. S3, her entire body exuded a suffocating aura. This little devil of the book Slip Lake, who made people tremble in fear, did not reach this stage just by relying on Little Loach and Liu Jimao. Gu Kan smiled bitterly and said, then tell me, how can I fix it? Little Loach, who had a feminine appearance and fair skin, scratched its head and said, Chen Pingan didn't say anything himself. Master, you shouldn't paint a snake with legs and paint legs, right? Master, don't you often laugh at those ants who are trapped in a desperate situation and make more mistakes? Gu Kan nodded. That makes sense. When they arrived at Chin Pingan's small room, Gukan took a small stool and sat on the threshold. She smiled and told Chin Pingan the purpose of this trip. She wanted to help give little Loach a name that did not involve monsters or flood dragons in the world. Chin Pingan put down his pen and raised his head. He thought for a moment and said, "Let's call it charcoal and snow." Charcoal and snow are similar to each other. It's especially precious. Gukan nodded vigorously and smiled at little Loach. "What do you think?" Little Loach said shyly, "It's too literary. I've never been to school. Will people laugh at me?" Gukan sneered and said, "If anyone dares to laugh at your real name, I'll..." Gukan quickly shut her mouth and secretly turned her head. She discovered that Chin Pingan had picked up his pen again and was continuing to write with his head lowered. Gukan basked in the warm autumn sun for a while. Languid and comfortable, she was about to doze off. She was sitting on a small stool. Even if the sky fell down, Chin Pingan would be sitting behind her at the desk. Gukan was not afraid. Occasionally, he would receive a message from the highest-grade flying swords, asking him to personally deal with some military and political affairs related to Dolly's future. Chui Dongshan stood at the edge of the circle and looked down at the two scrolls. One was the words and actions of Gu Kan and the servant girl, little Loach, while the other was the scene in the accountant's room, Chin Pingan. Chui Dongshan began to comment on Gu Kan, "Those with high bones will die young. Those with exposed bones will not be able to stand, those with strong bones will have a fierce aura, those with bones like gold and stone will have an extreme life." Hey, old bastard, if Gukan leaves Pearl Grotto Heaven and never sees Chin Pingan again, do you think it's possible for her to become the second Upper Five Realms cultivator in Aquarius Continent after Lu Laoqing? Chui. He opened his eyes and nodded, "It's possible. In this chaotic world, Gukan is like a fish in water." Chui Dongshan smiled and said, "Old bastard, what do you say now? Although my master's vitality has been greatly damaged and damaged the foundation of his Tao, in this deadlock, there's no more death. Are you more disappointed than my master? You spent so much effort to arrange the 4 hardships, but in the end, my master admitted defeat in the 3rd hardships. Since he insisted that Gukan's actions were wrong, he couldn't kill Gukan with one punch and couldn't leave Gukan alone. Then, he first crossed the threshold of his heart and resolutely shattered the 2nd natal item that he refined with great difficulty. Using this opportunity, not only did he turn your first 2 hardships into a joke, my master was also able to cut off and circle again. He chose a winding path with the least forked roads, temporarily putting aside emotions and laws, and not fussing over laws and principles. Instead, he began to trace back to the source. While thinking about this, my master began to try to walk out of his infallible circle for the first time. It's equivalent to breaking through the barrier, no longer being restricted by principles, and began to walk into the big world. As long as his mind can reach, there's no place in the world that he can't go. Chui. He didn't answer the question. "I heard that you picked up the arithmetic that we threw aside back then and began to study the meridian barrier." Chui Dongshan chuckled and said, "It's just a small achievement. It's not worth mentioning at all. It can't be compared to your great plans, old bastard." Chui. He sneered, "If you want to say it, then say it. What's the point of holding it back? Do you think that I'll beg you to tell me the wonders of those newly comprehended Xian principles?" Chui Dongshan rubbed his hands and said, "Since you're begging me, then I'll tell you something interesting. I believe you'll be curious as well. Let me ask you, old bastard Chui, don't you want to know how my master got past his future father-in-law and mother-in-law on that trip to inverted Hanging Mountain? I can give you a hint that it has something to do with Gukan Chui," he said calmly, Back then at the bamboo house on Luapa Mountain, Grandpa mentioned that Chinpingan's greatest danger at inverted hanging mountain and the Great Wall of Sword Chi was that he could break through 2 realms from the 4th realm in one go and reach the peak of the 6th realm. Chinpingan, a shrewd guy, must have thought of this. From the current signs, Chinpingan was able to restrain and release his fist intent to such an extent. The circumstances at the Lotus Flower blushed land might not be enough. It was most likely during the test of his father-in-law. Yes, there was a shop that sold Hiliang wine at inverted hanging mountain. After drinking the wine, one would become a daylily. Chinpingan should have reached the 6th realm at that time. How did he do it, and how did he return to his original realm? There are all kinds of strange things in the boundless world. There was also an old ancestor of the School of Miscellaneous Arts who sold wine for many years. None of this is important. I wouldn't be surprised if Chinpingan reached the Earth Immortal realm in one step. So how did Chinpingan pass the test? It's very simple. The 2 great sword immortals of the Great Wall of Sword Chi pretended to be passers-by and purposely angered Chinpingan in the Hiliang wine shop. They made Chinpingan's blood rush to his head and he gave up his future in martial arts to break through realms in a hopeless situation. They wanted to do justice for Miss Axayan Ai's parents. Chui Dongshan chuckled and said, "You old bastard, you're quite impressive. However, you better watch your words in the future. My mister isn't being shrewd. He's just thinking about everything. Compared to the 2 of us who are born with a belly full of evil tricks, the difference is like heaven and earth." Chui. He sneered and said, "I reckon that everyone at the Great Wall of Sword Chi thinks that Chinpingan isn't good enough for Ning Yao." Chui Dongshan said suspiciously, "Old bastard, what's wrong with you? Why are you saying good things for my mister? What? You want to surrender and lose half of it? If that's what you think, it's not impossible. Why don't we treat it as a tie?" Chui. He continued to say, back then, he was willing to give up his future in martial arts to pass the test of inverted hanging mountain. If he's not even willing to give up his future for Gu Kan, how can Chinpingan be qualified to walk into this situation? How many smart people have we seen who are unwilling to give up their wealth today and only give it up when they have more in the future? Chui Dongshan became more and more confused. Chui. You're saying good things for my mister again. Don't tell me you've lost your mind. Don't be like this. It's fine if you've really lost your mind. You can go crazy after that big matter is over. At that time, I'll just put a small rice bowl in front of Luopa Mountain's bamboo house. Chui. He pointed at the room in the painting and turned to look at Chui Dongshan. The corner of his mouth curled up and he sneered, "What did I tell you before? The 4th difficulty lies in the countless difficulties. Do you know that the 4th difficulty has just begun? The more effort Chinpingan puts in right now, the more worries he will have in the future. At that time, I reckon you'll be asking me to surrender and lose half of it. You'll have to worry about whether Chinpingan has completely gone mad." Chui Dongshan no longer pretended to be relaxed like before. He sat back down and said slowly, "Victory or defeat for a moment depends on strength. Victory or defeat for eternity depends on reason." Chui. He smiled and said, "If this moment is 10 years or 100 years, it's the lifetime of a mortal teacher. What will you do? What will Chinpingan do?" Chui Dongshan said with a straight face, "You have to learn from my mister and know how to treat the world well." At least, it could make Lu Zhimao more cautious. As long as Chinpingan had the ability to protect himself, at least it meant that he would not be a burden to her Gu Kan, right? As for the twists and turns of right and wrong, she was also annoyed by it. She did not think that Chinpingan would deliberately hurt Gu Kan. As long as Chen Pingan did not do bad things out of kindness and was not the kind of person who did things without considering the severity of the matter, she would let Chen Pingan stay in Verdant Canyon Island. After the meal, Chen Pingan began to walk alone along the lake path around Verdant Canyon Island as usual. He walked and stopped without any purpose. Occasionally, he would meet some cultivators of Verdant Canyon Island. Most of them were young and junior chi refinement warriors of the lower 5 realms. As for those handymen and maidservants, they naturally did not dare to leave their mansions at will. When they saw Chen Pingan, they would call him Mr. Chen because they did not know the background of this young man at all. They only heard that he was a distinguished guest who was personally invited to Verdant Canyon Island by Gu Kan. Not only that, Gu Kan would go to the house at the mountain gate every day to chat with this distinguished guest. This was a very rare thing for someone who came from the West. However, when the bookkeeper was more polite to everyone, it was hard to figure out and they subconsciously lost a lot of respect for him. Could it be that he was just for show? For example, was he Little Devil Gu's dolly fellow villager? Or was he the junior of that lady's maiden family? Chen Pingan walked on the quiet road and stopped. There were 2 people standing in front of him. One was Gu Kan's senior fellow apprentice, Chao Jie, and the other was Lu Kaisang who could catch Gu Kan's attention. He was a handsome young man in white clothes. In fact, he was nearly 30 years old, but he was still a teenager. He should have entered the cave-dwelling realm when he was 10 years old, so he could be as handsome as a child. This showed that the old nascent soul cultivator of Book Lake was very insightful to take Lu Kaisang as a closed-door disciple. Lu Kaisang left Chao Jie who had stopped and stepped forward with a serious face. You are Chen Pingan. I advise you not to order Can around in the future. Chen Pingan asked directly, or what? Lu Kaisang was slightly stunned and was about to speak. Chen Pingan's sight had already passed Lu Kaisang and looked at Chao Jie who thought he was an outsider. He hesitated and said something strange, forget it, just this once. Chao Jie stopped talking. Chen Pingan shook his head and said, no need to explain. I know. I just don't want to hear it. Lu Kaisang looked at the haggard young man with haze between his eyebrows and sneered, what a big tone. Did Can lend you the courage? Chen Pingan, who looked like a sick person, stretched out an arm horizontally. Chao Jie instinctively wanted to retreat, but he didn't want to show his fear in front of Lu Kaisang, an outsider of Qingsha Island, so he forced himself to calm down. The world was silent. Lu Kaisang laughed and said, is this AG? Chen Pingan frowned and said to himself, you don't want to come. You have to think about it. When he finished speaking, a golden silk thread rose from Gu Kan's mansion in an instant. The golden thread kept stretching and finally a long sword suspended above the young man's palm. Even if the flying sword was an inch above the man's palm, it was still. But the long golden thread brought out by the flying trajectory of the long sword. It never retreated. Lu Kaisang narrowed his eyes. He was shocked. Chen Pingan asked, according to the rules of the Book Lake, the 2 of you can die, right? Chen Pingan glanced at the slightly trembling semi-immortal weapon, Sword Fairy, and said indifferently, go back. The next time I unsheath, you will be satisfied. The Sword Fairy flashed away, and the golden thread of more than 10,000 feet long disappeared. Lu Kaisang still stood in place and refused to back down. Chao Jie had already made way and stood aside. Chen Pingan glanced at LV Kaisang, who looked as if she was facing death calmly. The fatigue on her face did not lessen at all, but he smiled unexpectedly. Gu Kan should really treat you as a friend. After that, Chen Pingan turned around and went back to the house. Lu Kaisang, who was a little scared, turned his head and looked at Chao Jie, who was in a cold sweat. Lu Kaisang asked, is this guy out of his mind? Chao Zhi did not dare to say a word. Lu Kaisang could run back to his master's place to hide, but once he provoked such a low-profile sword fairy, where could he run to? Chen Pingan returned to the house and lit the lamp on the table. The local records of various places in Book Lake were sent one after another, and there were also many records of the ancestral halls of various islands. The reason why Mr. Tian who could send them so quickly was very simple. They were all the trophies seized from Verdant Canyon Island, and they were the least valuable ones. If Chen Pingan did not mention it, sooner or later they would be burned as a pile of waste paper. The 11 vassal islands of the Verdant Gorge Island had all been wiped out by the pair of master and disciple. They all needed to be read one by one, and they also needed to make excerpts. After that, they needed to ask more details, and then it would not be a matter of sitting here and writing. But Chen Pingan did not think it was a difficult thing. First of all, he was good at grinding. He just had to put down the practice of boxing and do something else. Second of all, if he felt it was difficult just at the beginning, he could have quit long ago. Late at night, the full moon outside the window was bright and clear. Chen Pingan put down the pen, rubbed his wrist, and walked out of the door. He paced in a circle to relieve his boredom. He had sent 3 letters to Cloud Mountain in Longquan Prefecture, Taiping Mountain in Tongya Prefecture, and Fan Family in Old Dragon City. It was estimated that he would not get a reply from the Flying Sword for a while. Chen Pingan was not in a hurry, and he could not be in a hurry. In the past, he had traversed the mountains and rivers one step at a time. Flying swords that were as fast as lightning were much faster. Chen Pingan suddenly walked out of the circle, passed through the gate of Verdant Canyon Island, and went to the ferry. Standing on the shore, he squatted down, scooped up a handful of water, washed his face, raised his head, and looked into the distance. For some reason, at this moment, Chen Pingan looked at the infamous Book Lake in Aquarius Continent, but he thought of a good saying that he had forgotten its origin, and was not willing to delve into it. The heroic spirit of heaven and earth, awe-inspiring for thousands of years.